This is the Mark Belling Late Afternoon Show on News Talk 1130 WISN. See, I'm very intuitive, and then I'm very smart, and I'm very observant. You'd think you had all that together, and I'd just be perfect. Unfortunately, I have no other skills. I just knocked out all of the things that would create some sort of strength. I'm very intuitive. Observation. What else was it? Analytical. Did I have any other strength that was in there anywhere? That's pretty much it. What I've noticed, though, is some of these strengths that I have, most people don't have them. I'm blown away how poor the observation skills of most people are. I've known it for a long time, but I'm still blown away by it. One of the reasons we have poor, this is all leading to something very important. And somewhere in here, I'll give you the, where are these words? Oh, right here. Staple together. That's good. You staple them together, that way they're all together. That's why the only one I ever lose is the 6 o'clock hour one, because it's all by itself. Yeah. This is all going to lead to something. We did this thing. I talk about it all the time because it's it's one of the best things I ever did on the program. Paul remembers it mostly because I keep bringing it up. We started the program with me pretending I was on an open microphone and didn't know my microphone was on, and it sounded like I was bawling out Paul for having done something. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I deliberately made it a little like, I wanted to make it sound like this should not be on the air. And for the next 30 minutes, I think we did 30 minutes, I took calls and I said, what just happened? And we took 30 minutes worth of calls, and people described what it was that they heard, and it was unbelievable. No one was right. And these are people who called in because you wouldn't call in if I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't know. They called in because they thought they actually were on it. Now, this was back in the days before podcasting, so there would have been no way for anybody to go back and listen to it and get it. So the reason that I did this is because I believe that people have very, very poor observation skills, and there's a reason for that, which I'll explain in a moment. There's a reason I'm bringing all of his story up here at this time. And this just proved it. People thought I said this or I said that, or they would say this thing, and I think right at the end, one person got it right, and that's when we ended it, or I just explained what it was. But it went on for a long, long time. And I don't remember what exactly the reason was that I did it at that time, other than I've always tried to tell you that when people say, the police officers were the first ones to tell me that eyewitnesses are often the worst evidence that you can have at a crime scene, that if there's 5 people there, you might get 5 different versions of what happened. Physical evidence is always better. And this might have even been before DNA was coming around, which is like the ultimate sort of thing. But people's observation skills are bad. And the reason our observation skills are bad is because we have a filter in our brains. The filter is our biases. Let's say you see 2 people that that are arguing, and one of them you really like and one of them you really dislike. That bias is going to filter how you observe the argument that they're having. You're likely to conclude that the person that you didn't like was more belligerent in the argument just because that filter was in place. It biases your ability to perceive things. This is what's happening right now in our world. People have lost the ability to observe what is happening right in front of them, in part because their biases are filtering it out. And then there's the other thing that's relatively new, the just absolute censorship by the media of not reporting information that might lead people to a different conclusion, or not wanting to pass along something that they don't like. So not only are you having people filtering out the information that comes in with their own biases, you've got a filter even before that where stuff is being kept from you. This inability to process and observe is affecting a lot of things that are happening. Also, getting to the middle of this, and then I'll give you the 3 o'clock hour word in the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. Many people don't want to get rid of their biases. Let me use an example. I get asked all the time why liberals are so stupid. It's not an answerable question, but I can give you a stab at it in this way. I've often argued that conservatives believe in what works and liberals believe in what's fair. And their notion of what's fair is what makes them feel good. If it makes them feel good to believe something, then they're going to believe it. Whereas someone who is conservative generally, in order to believe in something, has to believe in something that actually works. The perfect example of this would be capitalism versus socialism. Socialism seems fairer to some people, and it makes them feel good to believe that everybody should have the same. So the fact that it doesn't work doesn't dent on them. Whereas most conservatives, they realize that socialism has never worked and therefore reject it. So when you get to this question of why do liberals advocate all of these things that never, ever, ever, ever work, my answer has been, and this is unsatisfying for people, but it's the correct answer. My answer is they don't care what works. That's not the thing that trips their trigger. They care what they think is fair and what makes them feel good, not what works. They've never cared about what works. We'll have, for example, Scott Walker did Act 10, and they said all these terrible things would happen, and a lot of us on the other side said, no, it'd be all this good stuff, that school spending would be bad, all these things, etc. Well, Act 10 obviously worked, and none of the terrible things that they told us would occur happened. But this didn't change any of their opinions at all. They didn't care about whether or not it would work. They simply base their decision-making on other stuff. So when conservatives try to argue, and when you listen, for example, to my show, if I say, here's what we should do about such and such, as you know, if you've been listening to me forever, I then tell you what I think and then I make the case. And sometimes I take forever to make the case because I try to lay it all point by point by point by point to make all of the reasons, to explain to you all of the reasons why I come to the conclusion that I come to. Liberals do not argue that way. You know what? You just listen to what a liberal argument right now. Listen to what they're chanting, all the F the police. Well, okay. Why? They're racist. Can you give me a little more here? You wonder why liberals can't do talk radio. Have you watched any of these marches or heard any of these chants? They don't chant a different thing for 5 minutes. They just keep chanting the same three phrases over and over and over again. That's all they have. There's nothing behind them. They don't like the police. They don't like authority, so they say F the police. You start arguing cases like, well, what are you going to do if somebody steals your car? How are we going to provide so many of the essential services that people need to live? What do we do for victims of domestic violence and rape, etc.? You get nowhere with them on this because all they care about is they think the police are unfair, and they don't like the police, so therefore that's the beginning, middle, and end of where you go with them on this. So you wonder why you can't have an argument, why they always change the subject or just start bashing Trump or coming up with something or another. Their minds do not work in a way in which they have to build a case for anything. You even see this with, I'm going to give you the word right now. 3 o'clock hour word, Sizzling Summer Cash Contest, text in word. Again, you have until 4 o'clock to get this into 200. The word is fun, F-U-N, fun. You have until 4 p.m. to text fun to 200. Somebody nationally win $1,000. We've had 3 winners on my program so far, 11 on WISN. You get a text confirming entry. Plus iHeartRadio info, standard data and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. You see this even among so-called liberal experts. Now, you would think, here's what you would be wrong, but you would think, you'd be wrong, you would think that an expert would be able to defend their case extensively because the expert has learned all of these things about whatever it is that you're talking about. For example, in many areas of horse racing, I would consider myself an expert. I'm not an expert on how to care for their hooves or the hands-on kind of thing and so on, but I would say that if the term means anything, somebody who's followed it as closely as I have for decades would probably be in the range of what an expert would be. And if you asked me something and I had an answer, I would be able then to explain, you'd be bored to tears, but explain all of the reasons that I come to that conclusion and base that answer on. Because that's how I essentially think, that if I say something, I'm going to give you my reasons for it. So you would think that this would be the case with these liberal experts. No. Why all of a sudden are all of them pushing masks when only several months ago none of them were pushing masks? Why all of a sudden in the middle of April were they pushing lockdowns when only a month earlier they were saying that this was no big deal and we didn't need to lock down and instead we should be mingling in society? Here's the answer. Once one expert at the top, who's a liberal, decides something, all of the other liberal experts have concluded their analysis. You take, for example, all of these, and I'm sorry, I know that this offends people, but I don't care. That's true. Many of these quack public health officers around the state of Wisconsin, they're not all quacks, but I would say more than half are quacks. They're more than half are quacks. More than half of them are actually not very informed on COVID-19, and they have very little ability to argue their case here. But what happens is this. Once somebody from above that they like says, you know, we need to shut down and lock down things, somebody issues an order. And in lockstep, they all come out and say the same thing. Almost none of them, though, stepped out and called for those lockdowns before the Mr. Big that said it in the first place. They then, as we illustrated on the show on Monday, if somebody actually does research and has all sorts of information and challenges them, they say, well, you shouldn't be able to challenge. I have these degrees. Well, yeah, you have all these degrees, but you have done almost no research at all. Your research is simply accepting the directive given from above. And because the directive given from above seems to you to be fair, everybody's locked down, everybody wears a mask, and it makes you feel good to say it, oh, I'm going to give this because I care. That's the end of it. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to do any kind of independent thinking. You don't need to do any sort of investigation of studies as to whether or not these masks have worked. You haven't taken any look at the areas that have had heavy mask uses and those that haven't and seen whether or not there's been any sort of a difference. You've not done any observation into how people use these masks and whether or not they're actually using them in a way that is healthful. You haven't done any of those things or provided any of the other type of thought that people have gone into. You've done nothing. Even though you're a so-called expert, you are not plying your trade. You're not using this expertise to go out, challenge, attack, find, develop some new theory, and so on. This happens with liberals on everything. I've commented many times over the years about how liberals will, just on a dime, turn and pivot and take the completely opposite stand of what they've taken forever. It's how they can go from, for decades, being the supporters of the sexual revolution, morality is just a social construct. Stephen Stills, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Anybody who had a problem with any of this stuff, well, you're just a prude, etc. Turn around entirely now to the point at which they are the people who think that if you look the wrong way at another person in the workplace, that it's sexual harassment and you ought to be fired. They just made a total turn on that. And what it does is it catches some of those in the middle, those that lived the first ideology, like Hollywood, the media, the people that are out there bopping anybody that they know. It catches them a little bit unawares, but they'll just make these entire pivots. And the reason is because it's not like they ever thought through the first one. Oh, let's just have sex with anybody you want. Divorce is no big deal. It's not like that. They just thought, A, it's fair, and B, this is what they wanted to advocate. Now, standing up for the right of oppressed women and others in the workplace, well, that sounds fair, and it's what they want to advocate, so they completely flip around and they go to the new thing. There was never any logical thought or examination in either position. There never is. I will tell you when they will turn on the electric cars. You want to know when they're going to turn on the electric cars? It's close already. When they realize that almost everybody who buys electric cars are rich conservative Republicans and that the companies that are selling the electric cars are mostly rich corporations. The fact that Musk himself is already dissing them, they're starting to turn on Tesla when they realize that, like everything else that actually finds consumer acceptance, corporations become rich doing it, whether or not the corporation exists now or just as an idea, like say Google was an idea that came in to the behemoth that it is, that's when they will turn against it. It has nothing to do with whether or not electric cars are a good product for our future or they're environmentally clean. That never comes into their calculation. The reason they like the electric cars in the first place is because hardly any of the actual car companies were making electric cars. So since we hate the actual car companies, let's support the electric car. It's cleaner, it's this, that, and the other thing. Until, of course, the electric car is driven by the guy worth several $1 million, spending $175,000 on a 9,200 horsepower. The horsepower numbers in some of these things are unbelievable. And the amount of money that you can spend on them and the potential of when you see who it is that's driving them and how much money is going to be made by the corporations that are going to be putting them out, that's when they'll turn on it as well. In the same way they want to turn on Jeff Bezos of Amazon right now, despite the fact that he gives billions to lefty causes. So, where's this going? One of the many issues that's occurring right now pertaining to coronavirus is the reopening of the schools. Tony Evers keeps saying he's not going to issue an order keeping the schools closed. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. He also said that he wasn't going to issue a lockdown order only a few days before he issued his lockdown order back in April. So you can't go by what he says, and you also can't go by what Evers thinks, because I don't think Tony, when I talked earlier about these, liberals not thinking it, Tony Evers didn't think anything through. Tony Evers is going to take the guidance that he's given by his staff. And once they tell him what the right position is to take, that's good enough for him, because Tony Evers isn't smart enough or open-minded enough or conservative enough to actually think through in his own mind what actually would work and what would not work. I don't know. We might even come up with dumber decisions if Evers was actually engaged and involved in these things, but he's going to do what the staff tells him to do. And if there's a delay, it's because the staff is arguing and he hasn't figured out which way he's going to go on it yet. But Evers is saying he's not going to issue an order keeping all of the schools closed. Again, I wouldn't trust it, because he also said he wasn't going to issue a lockdown order, and then in April he locked us down. So what he says and what he actually does are not necessarily the same thing. But if he doesn't issue an order, that means it's going to be up to every individual school, private school or public school district, to do what they want to do. And some of those decisions are being made right now. What I've cautioned people on, even though the school year starts in, depending on the area you're in, only a couple of weeks away, whatever they decide now, don't think for a minute that they can't just change the decision. The decision on reopening the schools should be based on which way it makes the most sense. And while we don't know everything about coronavirus yet, we know a lot more than we did 6 months ago when this thing was just starting to hit here in the United States. Or at least we just became aware of it hitting in the United States. And we should be making our decisions on that basis. But we're not. And we won't. We won't so long as the individuals that are making the decisions are liberals, because they don't base their decisions on what works. They don't base their decision on what works, and they don't base their decision on, listen to the distinction here, what will work. When you talk about what will work, it goes in one ear and out the other. Because as I've explained, and this is the great difference between conservatives and liberals, and many of you may have noticed that when you try to argue with liberals and you get nowhere, when you cite all of this evidence, you put out this, that, and the other thing, and it just keeps coming back to that, well, they don't want to think that way. Same thing happens when you try to discuss with almost any issue that people are in denial about. Abortion's a big one on that. It's just, in fact, it's probably the perfect example. The evidence is overwhelming that a baby in the womb is a human being. But when you try to argue any of that evidence, you're just given other your responses are non sequiturs that you get from liberals. You're a man, you can't tell me what to do with my body. I thought we were talking whether this is a human being or not. This in your body, not whether or not I can do anything. They'll just change and shut down and start screaming and go rant and raving and talk about their rights and so forth and so on, rather than actually engage. Because when you discuss what works and what is the best approach and what will work, it's language that they're not capable of engaging in. If they simply decided that they were going to support everything that will work, there'd be no liberals left, because liberalism doesn't work. If you wonder why we're in this pattern where everything liberals touch goes to crap, put them in charge of all the urban public schools. What's the worst thing we have in America? The urban public schools. What's the thing that's falling apart faster than anything else? It would probably be a dead heat between the universities, who's in charge of them, liberals, and the crime situation in the big cities, who's in charge of that, liberals. You just go all the way through. Whenever you put them in charge of something and they have total control where nobody else has any input, it falls apart and it doesn't work, because the decisions that they make in the first place are not based on what will work. If they were, they wouldn't do the dumbbell things that they do. But they don't focus on what will work. So this brings us to the decision of opening up the schools and whether or not the kids should be able to come back into class, and if so, with what frequency, and so on. There are a number of people who are passionately arguing that the kids should be coming back to school, that it will work, and here's how to do it. And in many communities, they're being rejected. Or the community is doing, I actually don't even know what the dumbest approach is. Some districts are talking about having some of the grades in and others. Oconomowoc is now doing this thing where they're going to do a hybrid where the kids are in school for one day, but then they're at home the next and back at school the next day after that. And again, all of this stuff is an attempt to avoid doing what the majority of people want them to do, which is to simply reopen the schools. What I've noticed about the arguments, though, is, again, the parents and the others that are advocating the opening of the schools have all of these logical arguments armed by all of this research, and they're countered with nothing other than being a teacher doesn't mean you should have to be a martyr. It's not safe. I shouldn't have to die to do my job. Again, those are just statements that you believe are fair. Well, I shouldn't have to be a martyr to be a teacher. I suppose it's not fair to be a martyr in being a teacher. And it made you feel good to say it. The likelihood of any teacher actually being martyred by coming to school would be something that you would have to back up by making a case, make an argument based on, well, such and such context, there's people in my age group and so on. But none of that ever happens. Just the statement is made. And because many of these schools, some private schools, and many school boards are controlled by the teachers union. Remember this point because it'll come up probably later. Elections matter. The elections you don't pay any attention to matter. When you vote for somebody who's on the PTA and has been sucking up to the teachers, are you surprised that when they get on the school board, they decide to sell out the parents and the kids and they just do what the union goons want them to do? Elections matter. But the school boards are often controlled by the teachers union because teachers unions put incredible effort into getting their people elected to school boards. The Milwaukee Public School Board, for example, is totally controlled by the teachers union. Therefore, the Milwaukee Public Schools aren't going to open because the teachers union doesn't want them to open. And they're not going to listen to any other argument. So the first perspective, would the school board members like the schools to open? Yeah, I think they actually would, but they're not going to cross the teachers union. They just don't do that. And when you present them these arguments about what works, what doesn't work, what's a risk, what isn't a risk, and lay out this case and make the case and so on, again, you're talking to a wall because all they care about is A, what's fair, and B, makes them feel good. And siding with the teachers and say, well, we're going to be safe. We're going to be cautious. That makes them feel good, and it makes them, it makes the teachers union happy. They're happy to have said it, and it sounds, well, it's fair. That we, everybody, we're all in it together, so I'll just keep the kids sitting there at home. Paul said they're calling the teachers who go back heroes. Well, now, Paul, this is a very, very hard one for me, though. If Haven't they all been telling us for 40 years they are heroes? I mean, I thought we already agreed that they're heroes and they're noble and so on. What are they? This is like some of these college football teams. Remember when that sport existed? Like Ohio State would always do this. They'd put a Buckeye on the helmet every time you made a good tackle or something. And the good players, by the end of the year, all you'd see were all these stars on their helmets. If the teachers awarded themselves a gold star every time they did something heroic, there'd be nothing but stars all over them. It'd be like us with our mask. All you would see is maybe the eyeballs. They're heroic for going back. Well, then what are we? What are we? We've been going in here. What's the guy over there at the McDonald's? Is he a hero? Well, then I wonder. That would mean by that standard, then the cops are heroes. They're not them. They're racist monsters. Well, Paul said, then I would actually accept if we could get him back in there. I'd call him a hero if we could actually get these lard butts to come in and actually do some work. I'd make the trade. You know, when we got Yelich and the Marlins, we did have to give up 4 guys, so far none of whom has turned out to be much of anything. But you have to give up something. I can cross my fingers. Okay, you're a hero. Now you got to shut up and start teaching? Anyway. The point that I'm making here about trying to argue any of this on the basis of logic ends up not winning the argument in the same way that trying to argue with Black Lives Matter over whether or not police are out there and they're racist monsters or not. It's not an argument that can be won and sway them over because they don't think logically, and they don't think about what works. They simply don't like cops, and it makes them feel good to say they hate the cops. That's the end of their process. There's nowhere to go for them after that. Now, one of the things that we talk about every now and then is, this became a thing like a year or two ago, and people started making the videos about the red pill versus the blue pill, which is the thing from the movie The Matrix. And, taking the red pill would send you back into reality, or is it the blue pill? What was the pill that sends you to reality? I ask you this all the time and you never remember. Why don't you just watch The Matrix for me? I don't want to watch that. I can't stand movies like that, so I don't want to watch it. Well, why don't you? Every time I bring this up, I say, well, you remember it the next time, and you know I've said this, and you never remember it. Which one? It's the red pill, isn't it, or is it the blue pill? Well, but the one you take the one to get out of the Matrix, though. It's the reality pill. Well, that's the red pill. Okay, right. The inconvenient truth. The red pill is the one in which the blue pill, you'll be made blissfully ignorant. And anyway, the people, they would talk about their red pill moment, their red pill moment, their red pill moment, and they were often liberals. And finally, there was something that they actually thought through, and they said, and everybody who at one point was a liberal had an experience like this, and I've told mine a million times. I was working in St. Joe, Michigan, and St. Joe, Benton Harbor, Michigan. It was the year that Benton Harbor declared bankruptcy, and the squad cars were repossessed. They turned off the street lights. All this happened. I'm there for 1 year. The mayor had to resign because of me. Then the city manager had to resign because of me. It was just unbelievable chaos. And across the river here is this most affluent community. It's like Elm Grove, and then you go across the bridge, and just the most, I'd say Benton Harbor might have been the most depressed city in America in terms of unemployment and so on. Had a large suburban area that was affluent because Whirlpool and other corporations were up there, but city of Benton Harbor itself was utterly dysfunctional. And when I went in there, I realized, A, they didn't have any local tax revenue at all because none of the property had any value, so they had no property taxes at all. They just were swimming in state and federal aid, and they had a fortune. Their budget was bigger than neighboring St. Joe, but none of it resulted in any kind of services or improvement or anything because, A, government programs don't work, B, there was incredible fraud because people skimmed the money. And I realized that all of these attempts to run anti-poverty programs to help a community in poverty didn't work, and in fact made the poverty worse. The more that you paid people to not work, the more likely they were, in fact, to not work. Well, I didn't instantly become a conservative, but it opened my mind on that, and I changed my entire viewpoint on whether or not we ought to provide much state and local aid for communities, and I came to the conclusion that we probably shouldn't. We should force them to do most of it on their own, because if it came out of their own pockets and they had to raise their own taxes for doing it, they would make better judgments. Also, you would require some responsibility in the spending as opposed to these blank checks that they were always getting. And as I said, in the time I was in Benton Harbor, they actually went bankrupt. They went through all the outside money that they had. The economy was terrible at the time, and there were a little bit of cuts, and they couldn't make ends meet, and so on. So anyway, getting back to this, the red pill moment is when someone who is liberal, but not apparently yet a mentally lost cause, when they get to that point of actually thinking something through, and often they'll say, well, this just went too far. A lot of people have pointed out when New York passed the law that allowed abortions to occur even after the baby was out of the womb. The Andrew Cuomo law that literally would allow you to kill a born baby, that for many of them, that became their red pill moment in which they realized that abortion had nothing to do with unviable fetal tissue masses and so on. And it was simply the ability of people to kill children that they didn't want to have without regard to whether or not they were human beings or not. There have been other cases like this as well, that for some people during the Trump era, it was the recognition that before the COVID thing hit, that using policies of lowering regulation and bringing corporate money back home, that you could actually employ the unemployable and get to full employment in the United States, and African Americans would be employed. And therefore, all these arguments that the welfare programs were the way to go fell flat when people realized that Donald Trump was the best president the country's ever had since Lincoln, I would say, for black people in this country, given the prosperity that he brought up and the low level of poverty rates that we had prior to the COVID thing coming in. So those are people that still have the ability to think and reason through, and they got past the platitudes and started examining this. And I think if you find anyone who was once a liberal and became a conservative, they simply started thinking things through. I've been asked a million times, well, what made you change? I said, life. Life happened. Realized that none of these things that I believed in worked. And it was pretty apparent. If you have an open mind and you're going to have observational skills, which gets back to where I was before, the inability of people to have observational skills, you'll come around to the right conclusion. Now, the inability to have any kind of observational skill, if you're paying only mild attention to the issue of coronavirus, and you were asked to tell us 4 or 5 things about it, mild attention, one of the first things that would happen that you would say is, it's way worse for older people than young people. That's, again, if you're paying only the slightest amount of attention, you would be aware that the majority of people who die are 60 and over, and the percentage gets even higher once you get over 70. And once you get under the age of 25, it's almost impossible. It's extremely rare. Furthermore, we've noted that pre-existing conditions are very, very common. Many of the people who have died supposedly of coronavirus were merely dying with coronavirus, that they had a lot of other health issues as well. Like the guy that was shot 5 times and wasn't dead yet. Well, he's likely to go with that 6th shot because he's already weakened. Which bullet actually killed him, how do you know? But they just classify them all as the coronavirus. In any event, that first observation that I would make is something that if you're paying just the slightest attention, you can easily pick up on that. Unlike some sicknesses and illnesses that we have, most are like this, but coronavirus is at extreme, that it's something that younger people ought to be the least worry that they have in life, particularly if you're under 20. For older people and people with pre-existing conditions, it's a bad thing. Yet that first basic observation would tell us that about the first thing that we ought to reopen in a society would be the schools, given the fact that the people who go to the schools are the ones that are close to zero risk of getting either very sick or worse, dying from the illness. The fact that we can't do that tells you it's impossible to argue any of this on the reopening of the schools with logic, because the first point that I made, irrefutable as it is, knocks out of the park almost every other argument. There is, however, a point, and Paul kept trying to bring it up because I think most of us are fed up with the martyr syndrome that's come from teachers, and we've been fed up with it for the longest time. And, you know, I always try to learn. One of the things that we learned from Act 10, the teachers, when they overplayed their hand, and often people overplay their hands. It's like, you know, in poker when you bluff with a bad hand, and a lot of overtimes in life, you don't, you know, Trump's the master of knowing what his hand is, the art of the deal, the negotiating thing. You have to realize how strong your position is in comparison to the others. The teachers actually thought that they were beloved, and they thought when they got up and they protested and said that it was terrible to take away your benefits, terrible that you would have to actually kick in for these massive pensions that you had, that the public would rally around them. And in fact, what shocked them was the public thought they were a bunch of crybabies. First of all, most of us don't have an employer-paid pension, and even those that do, you should kick in something for it. Those of us who have health insurance were paying something for it. We weren't paying nothing. So to hear this whining and crying and complaining, and then coming from people who have jobs with the softest work schedule of just about any job that exists except mine. And by the way, that comment that I make, I can make fun of my work schedule. When's the last time a teacher made fun of how little time that they had to work? It's always just the opposite. They're all Joan of Arc. They're all martyrs being burned. It's just the worst possible thing in the world, and so forth and so on. Last time a teacher said, well, you know, it's pretty doggone sweet deal I have not having. I was going to say for 3 months, what for them for 5 months, and according to them, the way it ought to be for the rest of time. As long as somebody might sneeze somewhere, we don't have to go to work. Anyway, they overplayed their hand because I think most people are simply fed up with this whole, woe is me, it's such a terrible life, it's just the worst possible thing, we're oppressed, and on 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 and on. So now they're trying it again. We shouldn't have to go back to work. Some of us might get sick. Unless you're a liberal yourself, and you take that position because it makes you feel good, or you are a teacher of a teacher in your family, this has fallen on deaf ears. Well, we might get sick. We shouldn't have to go back to work. That argument isn't impressing anybody other than your own crowd. It's got Paul all hacked off in there. That's my point. It hacks people off when somebody says they shouldn't have to go to work because they might get sick at it. You know who it especially hacks off? Those people who have been working this entire time. They're really hacked off about it. Now, Paul wants to get into the parental argument. I'm going to get to that point in here in a moment about who we value and who we don't value. But there is, and I'm going to go to the break, there is an answer for this. And I made this point a number of times, and I've got some stories that I could tell about people who listen to the advice. If you think a job is too dangerous for you, quit. That's been done lots of times. There are all sorts of people who didn't like the downsides of their job, so they go do something else. There's any number of jobs. There's all sorts of people who did one thing and they decided they were going to do another. Somebody decides they become an apprentice in masonry, and that's stonework and brickwork and all that stuff. Because they hear the pay is good. I hear it is good. They get out there and they hate it. Bad on your back. You're always lifting up heavy stuff. It can be extremely repetitive. When you're just breaking in, you're the guy actually laying the bricks. You're not the owner of the company. And they just, I hate this. That's fine. Quit. Try something else. I'd say the same thing to a teacher. If you think, oh my goodness gracious, that this is a job that's asking you to be a martyr, well, I would just say, then don't allow yourself to be a martyr. Go find some other job. Go find some other job where you can not get paid and sit on your ass for the next year and not do a doggone thing. And then tell me when that job is out there, because I've got the closest thing we have to that now. I sit on my rear end, get paid, and shoot off my mouth. I admit I've got a great gig. Now, the reason I'm able to do that is because I'm better at it than just about anybody else, and I have incredible talent. Most teachers are about as good as the teacher down the row, and they don't want to pay the better teacher any more than they're paying the poorer teacher. And there's 87 zillion of them. But as I said, my end of this is, if you sincerely are terrified of going back in and your school's going to open, quit. And I don't even mean that as a criticism. Like when you with your Wyatt, John Wyatt is quitting. He's decided that he doesn't want to come on 3 times an hour and keep reporting that we don't have any traffic yet because there's still everything locked down, so he's going to go do something else, right? He's got a right to do that. And if he thinks that's the right decision, he should do it. I'm not going to get into any stories, but I know a couple of people who, I've given this speech every now and then over the years for 30 years about when the teachers talk, I'm not appreciated. Oh, and the parents, they're so demanding. I don't have control of the classroom. The principal doesn't back me up. I don't like the curriculum. In other words, actually legitimate criticism the teachers are right about. I said, look, if you hate it that much and you don't like the pay, you think you'd be happier at doing something else and making more money doing something else? Quit. Okay, you went to school for this. So what? Go do something else if you think that's going to. And I know people who now make a lot more money and are a lot happier. And a couple of people have told me that my comments were the thing that really got them. I'm just quit. Now, I think most of the teachers that are whining and crying and complaining about not wanting to come back to school, realizing that quitting is a non-option for them, that they're not qualified to do much of anything else, that almost anything else would require them to work harder. They don't want to be put into a competitive environment. And at some point, they're going to be required to go to work, and they're not going to be able to find that job that allows you to take June, July, and August off, plus all the other holidays that are out there, and they're not going to find the benefits and all of those things. So they realize that this downside that they're actually being told in some communities to go to work when there's a virus that's running around, doesn't overcome the upside of all the benefits and all the things in the job that they like, that they never actually express any gratitude or thanks for, but they clearly don't want to give up. If the job was really that terrible, there wouldn't be so many people doing it. This is the reason, though, why so many people go and teach at private schools. They truly love teaching. The teachers at the private schools generally don't do the grousing, though. And I think the biggest reason for that is the teachers in the private schools, by and large, are not unionized, and they don't have somebody telling them how terrible it is. Furthermore, if you teach at a private school and all you do is say, oh, it's terrible here, it's terrible here, it's terrible here, it's terrible here, okay, fine, well, and you don't like it here, why don't you quit? We'll find somebody who does want to teach here, which ends the argument. For public school teachers, they don't want that point being raised to them. They want to make all of these demands rather than simply do what I'm suggesting that we do here. Anyone who don't want to come back, quit. We'll find enough teachers. Just quit. Got declining enrollment anyway. Quit. We'll make do without you. You don't want to do it because you don't want the schools to quit. And I don't mean leave. I mean quit. Give your 2 weeks. You're done. Go do something else in this economy with 87 zillion% unemployment where you want to have all the companies locked down as well. I want to talk about the whole impact on parents and so on, but I need to work in the Epic story. You all should know about Epic. Is it the most interesting company in the state of Wisconsin? Doggone near. I don't even know how many people work at Epic. Epic is like a company of rabbits. They just keep multiplying and multiplying and multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. There is it in today's newspaper, an aerial photo of the Epic campus. You see that? Was that in the newspaper? Where did I see it? No. I saw it somewhere. Epic is the medical records company from Verona that Judy Faulkner just kind of like started in. It turned her into a billionaire. If you go to a doctor anywhere and you check your records online and you get your after visits, I swear it's going to be Epic. They own that industry. They essentially created it. They're the company that puts medical records online. Privately held. You can't buy stock in it. Judy Faulkner owns the whole damn thing. It's in Verona, which is just outside of Madison. I talk about the widening that they did of 12 and 18. I call it the Judy Faulkner Memorial, not exit ramp, whatever it is. What do I call it? The Judy Faulkner, not bypass. What do you call that? Well, whatever it is, they rebuilt that whole thing because of all the traffic that goes to Verona, because of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who work at Epic. Anyway, Judy Faulkner says that she wants about 10,000 people to come back to work in person, and they're going nuts out there. I'll cover that, too, as we move forward. 351 News Talk, 1130 WI.
It's time for Rapid Traffic.
894 southbound, just before the Hale interchange, you'll find a crash off to the right-hand shoulder. Delays building.
So when you announced you were quitting, did anybody try to talk you out of it?
Not really, no. Not really.
See, no. No, and by the way, that doesn't even bother you, does it?
No. Well, there isn't really.
Average teacher,
there's literally nothing.
The average teacher said, maybe I ought to quit. They would just say, oh, no, we can't afford to lose you. Oh, how will we operate? No, you're so needed. You're so necessary. Oh, okay, fine. Good luck. See you later. See you in 18 months and you come crawling back to the door, begging for your job back. Paul, do you think that'll happen? You don't think so? Oh, the history of that in radio is high, of people who left radio thinking that they could go out and make it in the outside world. And the next thing, a year and a half later, they're back here as a part-timer. We've had that kind of thing happen. Or worse, there you'll be like, at some station after that, the part of the AM dial they've extended where even though nobody's radio has it, like 1730 or something or another, and doing the traffic on the comic strip station or whatever it is.
The comic strip station, okay.
Do they have ham radios anymore?
I have no idea.
Why would anybody be into that? Why not just, send an email?
Yeah, exactly. There's a million.
Yeah, it was a geeky thing when there was no other way to talk to somebody who was in Sweden, but now you can just do FaceTime. I mean, I get in. I think the thing that would be into it is building the system, but the actual talk, and then all they ever do, it's like CBers. All they do is, do you hear me? I do. And then you don't want to then talk to the guy. Okay, I got somebody on the North Pole that heard me here. And
because it's just another.
That's the end of that. They don't want to actually have a discussion.
Well, it's just another nerd at the end of the line.
So they just want to prove that they made the connection.
Exactly.
That's the end. Paul says that I'm guessing that's they're dying hobby.
Oh, it's got to be.
They're just like, I'm sure the numbers are way lower than they were. A guy across the street and up the street from me when I was a kid, he had that, and I went and watched that because I was already fascinated with radio. And so, I had that fascination then, but, that was when our TV set was 12 inches and it was black and white and there was fuzz all over it. Any type of technology. This guy's out there talking to people on the other side of the world, and all he's got is a little antenna sticking on the top of his roof. I'm still kind of fascinated that we can have an antenna laying up, sitting there on receive, and somehow people can hear me on the radio or the internet or whatever anywhere else. But since when is your last day? Friday?
Friday.
The last impression people make is not the first. The last impression is the most important impression. It's the only one anybody's going to remember. So you don't want to screw up these next 3 days.
Okay. Good advice.
So let's do this well now. Let's start judging him. We'll then determine whether or not it's any loss that he's leaving or not.
Do the traffic. If I can still do my job. 894 southbound, just before the Hale, a crash off to the right. You've got about 3 vehicles, including a semi there. Delays beginning near Oklahoma Avenue. It's 8 minutes to get from the Zoo interchange down to the Hale interchange, and some slowing on southbound I-41 from Capitol Drive down to North Avenue. From the Lynch-McGuanago Total Traffic Center, News Talk 1130 WISN, I'm John Watt.
Are they going to demand less money now without you reading their Lynch-McGuanago thing, or not? Do we know anything about this?
I would imagine it'll stay the same.
Lynch is going to storm away saying, if we can't have Wyatt, we're not going to pay for the traffic?
I don't.
Can you imagine
if I've sold enough
these jokes about a teacher that was leaving, making fun of how indispensable? I just the level of moral outrage that they would show over that would just be. And if they wonder why they get this kind of crap from people like me, look at the way they're conducting themselves right now. Well, being a martyr isn't part of my job description. Shut up. Just shut up. Oh, so it is part of the job description of nurses. It's part of the job description of the guy carrying plywood around at Menards. It is part of the job description of the people that are still delivering food at DoorDash. It's part of the job description of the people that are doing roofing. I mean, all around us, we still have a significant number of Americans who are actually working. And I honestly don't think any of them consider themselves martyrs. So will you please shut up about you guys supposedly being martyrs? You know, every time you go into a doctor's office right now, there's always some poor guy who's got to sit there and point that temperature thing at you. I know he's got a mask on, and we all have a mask on. That guy's on the front line. Everybody is 3 feet away from his head, and is he a martyr for doing that? No. So stop this martyr. Like I said, just shut up. Can we all agree that the teacher should just shut up about this? Paul, do you think that they should shut up? John, do you think they should shut up?
This and everything else.
It's unanimous. 100% of those surveyed think the teacher should shut up with their crying. Paul says there's a lot of ham. Well, why would they call? Why don't they get on their ham radio? W982. Manassas, Wisconsin. That's how it always sounded to me. It was always cutting out and so forth and so on. Well, if they're all into their ham radio, what are they doing listening to me? Maybe we're now on, is iHeart on ham radio? I think when they built that up, that we kind of neglected going after the ham radio market. Maybe if we put our thing out there, we get even bigger. Never mind the podcast and all that. Let's get into the ham radio. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling. Late afternoon show. I'm not going to name him, but we have a medical doctor who has done a fair amount of research on the data and the facts that we have that we ought to be using to determine whether or not the school should be reopened or not. Now, here's the problem with the material that he's come up with. As I mentioned earlier, he's speaking Greek to an audience that is listening in Latin. In other words, you're speaking a different language when you're trying to argue this thing on the basis of facts and what will work and what will not work. I think this whole thing in the schools comes down to one thing. The teachers don't want to go to school. They don't want to go back to work. They want to stay home and still get paid. And therefore, it doesn't matter what argument you bring up. Now, from a logical common sense perspective, this isn't surprising. A lot of people would like to stay home and do half the work and still get all their pay and not have to come in. It's not surprising that that would be their position. The difficulty that we are having here with regard to reopening the schools is, in this instance, the employer is more concerned with the employees than with anyone else. That is always a fatal mistake. I believe that the sports leagues are doing the same thing right now. They are appeasing the employees who want to protest and carry on politically without regard to whether or not their fans want to hear it or not. It's not enough for LeBron James and some of these other athletes to shoot off their mouths in their own time. They want to be able to make a political statement while working, which of course antagonizes their customers. I don't think most fans care if football players and basketball players and baseball players carry on and support every little liberal cause in their off time. It's when they take it onto the field and in the uniform that it hacks them off. The same thing with regard to the school districts and the teachers. They're making the mistake of deciding what the employees want to do ought to be relevant at all. Now, I'm not saying an employer should not try to establish good working conditions for the employee, and the employer should not be trying to put the employee in a best position to excel. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if the station did everything they could to make my show suck, that wouldn't be smart for them. That's not my point. My point is that the reason that the station wants me to excel is because then a lot of people listen and they make a lot of money. It's not because, oh my goodness, what Mark Belling thinks and cares about, that's going to be the driving thing for us. If I didn't make them any money, they couldn't care less what I would think, which is the normal way that businesses should react to this. You're supposed to be providing a product for your customers. And if you pay enough money, you're going to get decent enough employees that are going to go to work for you. Going to give you in a moment the 4 o'clock word in the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest. I want to share some of this from the listener. As I say, he's an MD in the Fox Valley. And he's been making a case to try to get one of the schools that he's affiliated with up there to go to in-class learning. He makes some points, and they're all interesting, and I can't share them beyond here. But he said, first, did you know that school closure data is not based on COVID-19 data, rather than an influenza outbreak that have occurred in the past, specifically swine flu? Some important and lesser-known facts. One, in influenza, children are 55% of the carriers and spreaders of the disease, whereas in COVID, studies to this point have demonstrated that children are approximately 10% of the spreaders. This is the first point he makes. They're using all these numbers and they're using the flu. Why? We all know the kids spread the flu. Anybody who's got a kid at home comes home with the flu, what happens to the rest of the family within 3 days? They all get it, right? So his point is we're using the basis of the flu for making the COVID decisions. The studies on COVID have shown that COVID is spread by children only 10% of the time, as opposed to influenza, where it's 55% of the time. In other words, the risk of kids spreading the virus is very, very limited in the case of this one. Next, adults are 73% of COVID-19 spreaders, not children. 3, the current COVID-19 deaths for ages 1 to 24 years old is a grand total of 151 people. That's under the 24 and under. 151 COVID deaths. Oh, wow, that's a terrible number. Do you know how many people there are under the age of 24 in the United States of America? Do you know what other causes of death would top that? By the way, that and beyond that, in 2018, there were 14,696 deaths from this age group. 4,074 deaths were due to car wrecks. I only wanted to validate your point made on the air today that more kids are likely to die on their way to school than from COVID-19. That was a point that we made on Monday's program that he points out in reaction to that. The kids are likelier to die being killed driving to school with their moms and dads than they are in school from COVID-19, given the extremely low death toll. And remember that 151, most of us think these numbers are inflated by counting all sorts of people who had a zillion other conditions and then had COVID in their bodies, but the COVID is counted as the cause of death because the reimbursement rate is greater. Still, only 151. Continuing. In regards to kids with health issues, there is a request for data in academia to help determine if or how COVID has any worse effect on kids with asthma. A group reviewed 67 COVID papers written since January, and they could not identify that asthmatic children in particular were any worse off, and those children who did succumb to COVID often had at least one or more significant underlying medical issue, asthma not considered one of them. Second, 87% of people who have died of COVID-19 in Wisconsin are over 60 years old. Now, he makes that point. Now, again, trying to argue this with the people who want to close the schools, again, is pointless because they don't care about whether or not any of this makes sense. But that number, again, depending on your perspective, that's a good number or a bad number. If you're over 60, it's not a good number. It means, oh my goodness, this thing is targeting us. Yet that is the reality. 87% of the COVID deaths are people 60 and over. Meaning this is a very minor health risk for people under 60, but a real issue for those over. His next point. Our COVID-19 numbers, I keep going up. Yes, because we test more than any other country other than Denmark. We test 145 people per 1,000, whereas the celebrated South Korea only tests 29 per 1,000. So he makes the point there. He said, why are South Korea's numbers so low? They don't do any testing in South Korea. South Korea is testing 29 out of 1,000 people. We're testing 145 out of 1,000 people. That's exactly 5 times more. Why? Because South Korea is not testing the mass population. They're only testing people who show symptoms. He then tries to make the points that many of us have made about all of the other problems that are increasing because of COVID lockdowns. EMS calls in Milwaukee County in March and April of 2020 compared to March and April of 2019 demonstrated a 54% increase in drug overdoses, 80% increase in suicide attempts compared to the same months in 2019. A definite percentage were in children. So in other words, more kids are overdosing and more kids are committing suicide because of the lockdowns that we're putting in, locking them down from a disease that won't kill them. Suicide in 100% of its cases kills someone by definition. We're not talking suicide attempts, we're talking suicides. He then points out a pediatric JAMA study, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association, shows that there was 7% increase in depression and more than doubling of anxiety in kids younger than 18 years old during COVID lockdown. 7% increase in anxiety. Then, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest Network, for the first time in its 25 years of existence, had a 50% of its call volume from minors who are considered to be safer at home only to be sexually abused repetitively by their in-home abusers, a story that is rarely covered. You've got everybody locked at home. Some of those kids are locked at home with perverts. The perverts are locked at home as well. They're not allowed to go out to work. Everybody's in there at home. Because they've got everybody locked out at home, again, the unintended consequences of doing this, the unnatural action of putting a lot of people into the same home, which exists in some of these family units, sexual abuse is on the way up. He then goes on and he's coming up with all this material to present to his local school in an attempt to make the case that there is very little risk from reopening the schools to the kids, and there is terrible risk to them to keeping the schools closed. We come back after the break. I'm going to discuss the whole, as I said, the epic story is still out there to get into as well. I'm going to leave you, though, as we go into the break with this. Who do we run the schools for? The kids? The employees? Or the taxpayers? What is the purpose of public schools? News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. I got this from a listener. It's short. Mark, let's save everybody a lot of money. Sell all the schools, fire all the teachers. Then hire one teacher for each class and grade to record each curriculum, all done. Slap it online to everybody. No need to keep paying the teachers union. We could do that nationwide and include most college degrees. Guess you could say that the teachers are canceling themselves. Now, his point is that if we're actually going to do all this stay at home and so on, you don't need anywhere near the number of teachers because they're mostly providing an online instruction, and then that's the end of it. They put it out there, and then the kids do a bunch of work, and they may submit it, and maybe the teacher's grading it. But it's not like the teacher's standing in front of the class conducting class, and it's not like the student-to-pupil ratio matters much anymore because you don't have all these kids in the same classroom. Why not simply take the best teacher for the second grade in an entire school and take all the three, and that one would teach all the second graders in the class, slap the thing up there, do 3 or 4 recordings, and that's the end of it. You can get rid of a lot of these people. Which is one of the reasons why some of the online schools that are out there, mostly charter schools, are able to provide a high-quality product despite having, in some cases, highly paid teachers. They have fewer teachers, but they pay them a lot of money, and they don't have the overhead of operating buildings. They don't have the overhead that the schools have of parking lots and snow removal and landscaping and utilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if we're going to do this, if the teachers union is telling us that you can do this just as well by having the kids at home, well, then let's get rid of most of them, get people who specialize in online. Let's start scaling off the school buildings. Let's cancel some of the referendum projects that are out there while Wauwatosa building all of these new schools that they don't intend to use. Just blow a whistle at all of it. Because if we want to go this online route, we probably can, and we probably might get fairly good at it. We've heard that some kids, especially those with learning disabilities, don't do well. We would give up the whole notion of kids socializing with one another if everybody learned at home. But the teachers are the ones that are telling us, hey, the kids aren't going to suffer if we do it at home. They're the ones that are saying it. What they are doing is they are writing a blueprint for saying that they are an obsolete profession. If you can do it just as well online, then why are we doing it with you people at all? Then let's just set up a few online academies and get rid of the whole doggone thing. The reason the teachers don't think that way is they simply believe that they are immune from competition. Government usually is. When you take a look at all of the changes in technology that have rendered some companies obsolete, print newspapers going under, magazines going under, when's the last time you saw somebody looking at the Yellow Pages book? All these things going under because of changes in technology. Government pretty much always keeps itself around forever and ever and ever. They never downsize the staff. They never switch to online services. They never have fewer people that are out there. They just assume that they can go out there forever and ever and ever. They don't think that there's any chance that it might occur to some of these local school boards, maybe we should go mostly online. We'll operate a couple of brick and mortar schools for the parents that insist upon it. But we can get rid of a lot of these teachers, lower taxes, get better teachers, and get rid of all of these crybabies who say that it's not safe to come into work. Plus, we're doing them a favor because they don't think it's safe. In other words, they don't worry about their bluff being called because nobody ever calls their bluff. The place where this bluff is going to be called is at the universities. If people don't go, people don't go. And as I've argued in earlier programs, I believe that the current generation of kids, now juniors and seniors in high school, many of them are going to realize there's a lot more money to be made by going into some of the trades, the skilled trades for which you don't need college. Many others are going to make the decision that it simply isn't worth it going into these places in which you can be crushed spiritually and mentally for having conservative viewpoints. And it isn't worth getting yourself $240,000 in debt for a major that is of little value once you graduate. They're simply going to opt out. Combine that with the declining birth rate, there's not going to be the same call for colleges and universities. That's going to end up doing them in, and the story 15 years from now is how many of them will have closed. I'm convinced of that. There's going to be a dramatic decline, especially among families more conservative oriented and who are focused on their kids having careers, making money. They're going to figure out other ways to do it. Plus, the online universities that are out there are just going to keep growing. But from the perspective of the public schools, there's this smugness that they're always going to be needed. This is going to create an opening for private schools that do open because some parents will consider, I'll just send my kid over there. And once they go over there and realize that they're now taught by a caring teacher and not some unionized crybaby, they may just keep their kid there forever, especially if the academic quality is very good. But it all circles back to the question, and it's the one that I gave you over the break. If it's a balancing act between giving the best quality education to a kid who's not at much health risk and requiring people to work, teachers who might be at some health risk, which master are we going to serve? And in the end, the answer is neither of them is the number one master. Why do we run schools? We run schools because we, the taxpayers, have decided it is in the best interest of our society to have educated children. And we believe that, I think wrongly, but we believe that public schools are the great equalizer that can provide a quality education to all. And what's in the best interest of those of us who are taxpayers? Well, I think if we're going to err on the side of the benefit of someone, it ought to be for the students for whom we have created the school system rather than the employees who don't have to work there. And as I say, I think if any of them quit, they'll be replaced by other people who want to work for them. So therefore, the bottom line is simple. We don't run the school systems for the schools. We may do it now, but we shouldn't. We don't run the school systems, rather, for the teachers. They're merely the employees. If you put up an office building, you don't put it up because you've decided this is going to be a great building for some janitor to work in. You hire a janitor to clean the building and tell him, here's the building that you have to clean. You shouldn't compare a teacher to a janitor, all right? A secretary, a salesman. You could even see the executive vice president in charge of high muckety-muck operations. It's the same thing. Rationalization is the second strongest human drive. The teachers have a really sweet gig right now. They've gone all summer not having to do any work. They finished the end of last year not having to do much of any work. In some cases, I grant you, some of the teachers worked very hard to prepare online learning and so on. But those that didn't got paid the exact same amount. And they don't want it to end. Given the fact that the COVID thing, I think, is not going to end, and I think in January the likelihood is the numbers will be about what they are right now, there's not an end game in place for all of this. So unless you've simply decided that we're going to have online learning permanently with bloated school districts that have just spent fortunes passing referendums for buildings that they don't use, the school boards need to put the kids back in the schools. And if a teacher sincerely feels at risk, and okay, some might, quit. Come back after the break. I'm going to discuss how this applies to everyone else in life and how this is playing out in a real-life case in the private sector, the Epic story. It's 427 News Talk 1130 WIS.
It's time for Rapid Traffic.
I-43 southbound at Highland, a crash blocks the right lane. Heavy delays all the way from Capitol Drive down to that crash scene. It's 22 minutes to get from Brown Deer to downtown. 894 southbound just before the Hale interchange. An accident on the right shoulder. Delays from Oklahoma down past that scene. If you see traffic problems, call the Tri-City National Bank, your hometown bank, total traffic tip line.
Did we ever explain what you said you're going to be doing with the rest of your life?
I'm going to be a home inspector.
I'm just asking, did we cover this already? I never remember. Paul, did we cover this? We did cover it. So that's right, we did. And then you wanted to get it. You wanted to get in a plug for your employer. I wouldn't allow that because they can join everybody else in there. Actually, I should allow the plug to get in, and maybe they won't advertise then, so we could get our spot load down to 47 minutes an hour from the current 47 and a half. So you're going to be like your home inspector. That means you're going to be going into people's homes.
I am.
John, that's not safe. There's coronavirus floating around in there and so on.
It's very risky.
So my point is this. There are probably some people who work in that field who've been a little freaked out lately, going into people's houses and touching all of this stuff and so on. I'm guessing there's probably some that have that. And my response is, well, you need to find a new line of work because you can't be a home inspector unless you inspect homes. But if you don't feel comfortable going into people's houses because of this, that, and the other thing and all that stuff out there, there's nothing wrong with that. There's just no expectation that we need to cater it for you. Certain jobs have certain responsibilities. And teaching is a job in which you're expected to be in school. This notion that we're supposed to change the rules of a workplace because some employees don't want to fill the rules, it's applied almost nowhere else in life. And there's quite arrogance on the part of these teachers who somehow think that all these other fields where it's just accepted as a given, if I want to have my job, I got to show up and do it, that they should be held to a different standard than, again, the teachers, particularly given the fact that the teachers have told us forever that it's so important to have kids in school. It's so important to have the low class sizes. It's so important to have the individual attention. It's so much better than the online school, so much better than the virtual school, so much better than all of this other. They told this forever. This is why I think it just comes down to there's not really that much of a fear, because if there was a fear, they would simply quit because there's a recognition at some point they're going to have to go back. I just think they're using this to continue to pull a scam in which they sit on their cans and get paid a lot of money without having to work as much. And maybe if I was one of them, maybe if I could get full pay, do a 5-minute lecture and then say, okay, read this stuff and fill it out online and I'll check mark it and get it back to you tomorrow, maybe I gravitate to the same thing as opposed to standing in front of a classroom of bratty kids with the principal yelling at me all the time and having to put up with parents who are bitching and moaning and so on. I could see why you would probably want it. I just don't see what the advantage for the rest of us in society is to indulge this essential excuse making and laziness. Right? Right?
Right.
Right. You do your OQ. You know what you're going to have to be. You know what's going to happen. He's going to inspect some house, and then he's going to say at the end of it, this inspection is brought to you by. So, Paul, do you know the inspector he's going to work for? Is it a good company or is it no good? Your wife, what? Your wife works with them all. Is that an endorsement or not? I heard she just uses the ones that are cheapest.
We just want them to be.
What does she hate? The ones that inspect for 4 or 5 hours. So John Wyatt is expected to just go. Yeah, well, I know what realtors hate about home inspectors. They don't like any of them that find problems because that's what they don't want, because the problem is something that has to be rectified or another. No, they want somebody who's going to go in there and, just want to get the hell out and go home. So John, understand that who's buttering your bread? It's these realtors. They don't actually want you to find any actual problems. Not like your traffic where you nitpick and okay, down out here in Sussex we some manure fell off the back of a hay truck or something or another of this stuff that you bring up.
I will not offer alternate routes during my inspections.
Right. So no, you're going to work for an inspector.
Yeah.
Is this an inspection company that starts with a number?
No.
Oh. I was trying to find that out. Somebody was demanding to know where you were going. I actually don't care where. Paul, do you care? Oh, you do. You know, because of your wife being in that business. We're doing an extended segment today in which I'm trying to cover this whole school reopening issue by looking at the broad, big picture. Now, there are some people who don't much care one way or another whether or not the school's reopened. The people who really care are obviously people who have kids in the schools. One element of the story that I have not mentioned yet, and it's not because it's not an important element of the story, I wanted to use it here at the beginning here of this segment. The refusal. And again, my whole problem with the way we've reacted to coronavirus is everything has been a one-dimensional decision. Nothing has ever been weighing the ramifications of the decision. In other words, is it worth it? Like the large question about coronavirus, was the lockdown worth the destruction of many portions of our economy, the need for bailouts, the killing of all of these businesses and so on? Was one more virus that mostly only kills old people worth all the damage that we did? Or are the benefits of wearing masks worth making people put them on everywhere they go for the next year? Nobody ever wants to do this. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Or what the costs and ramifications are. You heard the person who was talking about the number of suicides and drug overdoses and so forth that are going up. How many problems are we creating far greater than people catching this particular virus are we creating because of the way that we have responded to this? There's never been any. Is this action we're taking, which might help in the coronavirus, worth all the other stuff that comes down the pike as a result, including this one? You have millions of American families premised on the kids not being at home in the daytime. That's the way they've set up their family lives. Millions. When people decide to have kids, unless it's an accident, usually you have a thought process working through it. Many families are like Paul's were back in the days in which your kids were still kids. What are your kids now, 56? Yeah. People set up their families and they usually have a plan. I've seen this. The plan works one of three ways. Mom and dad are both going to continue to work, but maybe until the kids get to be 2, we're going to have to work this through, and then we'll choose daycares and so on. And after we get to that, when the kids are in school, mom and dad are going to continue to work, and we're going to have to figure out what we do at 3:15 in the afternoon when the kids get home. Or mom's not going to work, at least until the youngest kid gets to be 10. That was the norm when I was growing up a million years ago. Moms were generally staying at home. In the current time that we are in, it's still the case. Usually it requires, if it's the mom staying at home, the dad makes a decent enough living to support it. And the third one is the one that's become more in vogue in recent times, and that's dad stays at home. Those are the cases in which it's mom that has the super duper paying job. For the families that are of divorce or the parents never got married, there's all those juggling acts. Do you understand what a mess this is for all of those people? I'm doing some, what's the term that I'm doing? What do you call it when you get rid of your junk? Decluttering. I can't handle it. Paul, I'm just decluttering me. I was talking to, everything feels good when you're done. Well, with one exception. The whole point of doing anything is to get to the getting done of it. I mean, the only things that which the only time you're enjoying, like drugs, I suppose that there's no point. You don't feel good after you're done with that. But anything like this that requires a sacrifice is done for the purpose afterwards. It's like saving money for your future. Well, that's no fun until you get to your future and now you have all of this money. Talking to a doctor today, he said he had 6 kids. Talking about when they went through this. He said, we put out 30 bags for the garbage man all in one day. I'm sitting here thinking, 6 kids and you only had 30 bags. I might get to 18,000 the way this is going. Anyway, I manage only me, and it sometimes can be overwhelming managing only me. Let's imagine I was younger, and now let's imagine. Well, let's describe what reality often is. Let's imagine some woman and I had a kid and we just never got married. This is a lot of people that are younger than us now. A lot of people. But I'm not a scum of the earth, and I'm going to be responsible for the child and his life. We're either not married or maybe we got divorced when the kid was 3. So let's just use that situation. And I put myself in the other guy's shoes and think about how miserable this is. Okay, We got the shared custody thing, and I'm only putting one kid in. Imagine two. And the shared custody is going to be one of those every other day things. That's how some people do it. I don't think that's the best way to do it, but some people do it. You have them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I have them Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. The following week, we switch it around. Now the kid is home every day. Can you imagine this argument? Are they both supposed to quit their jobs? How many live-in nannies can you have? Kid's 9. Who's going to sit there when he's in the house supposedly doing his lessons on the computer? Or the kid's 7 trying to do online learning? If you have a shared custody relationship, are both supposed to quit their jobs? Or do you try to cobble out a deal? Guess what? You quit your job and you have the kids' daytimes and I'll still do my nights. Okay, who's going to be the one that says, I'm quitting? Imagine being in that situation. Now imagine you've got a married couple. Guy's a car salesman. His wife is a bookkeeper. That's a bad example. You could do that at home. His wife just does something. I don't know. What can we ever do? She works at a bakery. She's a baker. How's that? We're not going to have the kids go to school now for months. Is the guy going to quit his job as a car salesman? Do we give up the bakery job? What are they supposed to do? Again, I don't know how many people are out there looking to be in-home nannies or babysitters for kids that are doing online learning at school. But the more demand for it there is, and in order to get somebody that you trust with your children, who's not going to steal all the stuff in your house or do something worse, you got to pay a decent amount of money, and you might have to pay a lot if that's the call for it. Is anybody even thinking about this problem? You've completely changed the rules of the game for parents. You're now telling them that somebody's got to be home every single damn day until the end of time. There are families that planned in advance that that's what it was going to be. Often there's a stay-at-home parent, or often they have enough kids that there was always a younger kid or two that would need time to be dealt with. They can handle this. What are the two-parent, both working families supposed to do? Now, it worked out a little bit, and we worked our way through it during March, April, and May of this past year because a lot of businesses were locked down then. But as companies start going back and people are called back in, you're not at home, are you? So what are you supposed to do? Part of the deal with schools is the kids go to the school. We have clearly put, and there's a lot more parents than there are teachers, we have put these real life needs. And I'm guessing there's got to be brutal arguments going on at home. Well, you quit your job. We can't afford. I just imagine this. Why should I quit my job? You quit your job. We have put these real life needs secondary to those of the teachers that don't want to go to work. Now, a number of people have made the following point to me. If these masks work so well, why are the teachers afraid of going back to work? I think that tells you that nobody really thinks these masks work at all. Otherwise, nobody would be afraid to go back to work if they just had to have a mask on all day. Also, I think that the teachers, who are probably the ones screaming the most for the mask, don't want to wear a mask all day. And that's another reason they don't want to go back to work, because they don't want to have the mask on, that they're just phonies and hypocrites on the issue. Now, let me bring you to the story about Epic. As I mentioned, for those of you not familiar with Epic Systems, it's one of those companies that every one of you uses, just about every one of you uses, but you don't know it. When you have companies in which the company you deal with uses it as a contractor, they can be anonymous. Like back in the days in which we all still used printed paper. You get all this material. Let's suppose somebody sent you material in the mail. Nobody thought about which company printed the paper that it comes on. As I mentioned, Epic has become the North American leader, maybe the global leader in online medical records. Every medical record that I have that's online seems to come through Epic. And almost all medical records are now online, and it's been a tremendous advancement. Boy, wait until those systems get hacked, the freaking out that's going to occur. And keeping those things secure is, of course, an industry in and of itself. But it just makes life a lot easier. When your test results come in, they show up online within 2 hours. You don't have to wait for something in the mail from the doctor. You have a question for the doctor, you have to call them up and wait for the doctor to get away from a patient. You can send an email to the system. If you want to have a prescription refilled, you don't have to call in. You can just check the thing in. You can go and check your medical records, your test results for the last 5 years. All of those for me, they're all online and so on. Well, Epic designed all of that. Epic was the brainchild of a woman, lefty, from Dane County. Her name is Judy Faulkner. She came up with the idea. Whole world's going online. She said, gee, why don't we put medical records online? Amazingly, she got there first, or she got there better first. And Epic has exploded. If you haven't been past the Epic, they call it a campus because a campus is, I guess, a place that has more than one building. It just keeps going on and on and on, and they keep putting up new and more buildings. It's just like Silicon Valley. It's unbelievable how many people work there. I don't even know the latest estimate, but it's over 10,000. I know it's over 10,000 because they're calling 10,000 people who've been at work at home back to work. The company is based in Verona, which is in Dane County, southwest of Madison. Because it's based in Dane County, almost everybody who works at Epic is a lefty, because that's all that there is in Dane County. It's white-collar work, not really totally tech-oriented. Many of the people who work there are techies, but every type of employment would come into working for a firm like this. And even though it's a tech company, obviously it's labor-intensive, given, there's people who work in sales, who work at the design. They're just a incredible number of things that you would have with a company like this. And Faulkner has said, we're coming back to work. At least 10,000 of us, which is not the whole company, but a good chunk of it. And the companies are in an uproar. Employees are in an uproar. They are in an uproar. It's not safe. This is terrible. Now, they're not unionized. There's talk of forming a union. But they're horrified at this. This is, again, what happens when people get a mindset that somehow, as an employee, they shouldn't have to do something they don't want to do. We have, speaking of epic unemployment in the United States right now. We don't know the long-term fallout. Some companies are going under. Others are going to be devastated. And every employer is learning from the online experience to see how many jobs we can permanently downside and simply do tech-oriented. You would think that an employee who is essentially a commodity, in other words, somebody who has a skill that a lot of other people have similar skills in, would be jumping at the opportunity to get back to work and reestablishing their job security. I just think that under Trump, we have had such a strong economy that people just assume that they will always have a job when they want to have one, and nobody is sweating at all about the long-term consequences of just shutting down the economy forever. I am willing to bet that if you broke it down by politics, the majority of the people who would be insisting on still working at home are liberal, and the majority of the people who are prepared to return to the workplace would be conservative. I said majority in both cases. There's exceptions. Two reasons for this. Liberals don't think about what works and don't think about what's practical, as I established earlier. They just take the stand, what I want to do. Well, I want to stay home. It doesn't go any deeper with them than that. This is what I want to do. And the other part of it is a total lack of understanding of the long-term consequences of just deciding that we're going to shut down society for long periods of time and thinking that you can magically keep writing out this $3.4 trillion stimulus that the Democrats, $3.4 trillion on top of what we are. They're just making up numbers. They're making up a number so high they know the Republicans can't bite on it and then say that the Republicans don't care. And I know a lot of liberals just think you can magically just keep doing this and doing this and doing this and none of us ever have to work ever again. So you find the one private sector company in which employees are resisting coming back to work, and lo and behold, it just happens to be in Madison. There is a real problem here with the inability of people on the left, and it is going to get worse as the schools get worse. It is going to get worse as we censor conservative talk. It is going to get worse as we keep telling people things that they want to hear that will make them happy. It is going to get worse as we protect people from speech that they feel threatened by. When you have people that are so stupid as to think that they get to tell the boss whether or not they have to come in to work or not, you have a real concern about whether or not we have enough collective intelligence to move forward as a nation. And the problem that Judy Faulkner has, unlike the schools, her company's based in Madison. It's not like she can find 15,000 replacements to deal with all the dead butts that decide not to come back into work. But the question will be whether or not she will call that bluff. Will she say, look, you're coming back to work, and if you don't, I'm firing you? If she says that, they'll come back to work. Whether or not she, a big lefty herself, can bring herself to that point is another question. A lot of these other tech companies that are in a work-at-home mode right now are going to be facing the same thing as well. Now, I'm surprised that some of these companies have decided that they are going to bring people back in. I would have thought that a lot of these companies would be at stay-at-home forever, especially tech-oriented companies. But I'm guessing some of these tech companies have noticed that the employee productivity is down when they're working at home because they're spending a lot of time goofing off. And when you actually have them in an office and can more closely monitor their actual activity, you might get something out of them. And remember, got to get to a break. Remember this. Many of these tech companies that have been grown in the last 20 years have all been set up with this model of teams and collaboration. You look at the empty Northwestern Mutual office tower, the whole thing is set up for people to be sharing workspaces so teams can talk to one another and so on. It's not cubicles with walls. It's like circles where the teams and pods can be together. These corporations have set themselves up for all these people to always be working together. Well, if everybody's at home, the only working together is sending an email or going onto the Teams application. It's not the same thing. So I think what you're seeing now at Epic and the fight over whether or not she can get him to come back to work or not, this is going to play out across corporate America eventually. I've been asking forever, when does this end? When do we finally say at some point we're going to reopen our society again? Nobody has ever given me an answer. They never have a metric with regard to this number of people having the virus, this number of positive tests, this number of deaths. There's never an answer for this at all. The clear answer is going to be when we start having to, and I think Epic has decided they have to do it. The schools, they're only going to decide they have to do it when they hear more pressure and complaining from the parents and the taxpayers about the gold bricking of the teachers. News Talk WISN, Mark Billing, late afternoon show. I'm going to try something here that I know isn't going to work. There is no spike in coronavirus in Wisconsin. I know, it's just me. Trying to make this point and have it stick is like trying to drain the ocean with a straw because everybody is telling you there is a spike with coronavirus in Wisconsin. There is not. I'm about the only person in the media, maybe a few other conservative talk show hosts, who every day checks the hospitalization numbers. The best barometer we have of whether or not there is a spike or not, or numbers are going up or down with regard to this virus, is how many people are in the hospital. The number today is 258. Now, what it has been doing the last 3 weeks is fluctuating more from day to day than it did in March, April, and May. It can go up 40 or 50 in any given day. My analysis of this is that that's because a lot of people are staying for only one day. I mean, they get you out of the hospital as soon as I had a stroke. I was only in for 2 days, for heaven's sakes. They get you out as soon as possible. And on coronavirus, because they develop very good treatments now, a lot of people only need to be in for a day and then they're sent home with their medication or the program that they're on. So it fluctuates somewhat, but it's been in this range in the mid 200s, occasionally popping over 300 for several weeks. This is lower than it was in April and May and even into June in the state of Wisconsin. It has been essentially on a flat line for weeks, a little bit of an increase here and there and then a decrease here and there. What we are seeing is an increase, there's an increase in cases. They use the word case to describe positive tests. We've learned that the positive test numbers are probably screwed up. People have gotten letters say you got a positive test, they didn't go in for a test. People go in and they get tested 5 days in a row because you're supposed to be tested over and over and over again. They're counting all of the tests as a case. But even with that, we also know that there's been a dramatic increase in the number of tests. The one thing you can't invent is somebody's either in the hospital or they're not. And that number is not spiking it's not spiking from last month, and it's not spiking from where we were in the spring. It's been at about the same rate in Wisconsin for a long time. So there's not a spike. How do you explain the increase in the number of cases? It's not cases, it's tests. How do you explain the increase in the number of positive tests? We're testing more people. We had before a lot of people who had this thing and didn't know they had it. In May, who was being tested? People who were sick and thought they might have it. Who's being tested now? Entire workplaces are being tested. Anybody who's got a suspicion goes to one of the free testing sites. We're testing way more people. We're testing a massive number of the population, and most of them don't know they have anything because they have no symptoms. When you have a bad symptom, you're in the hospital. Some have argued that the more important number than that is ICU. I've been in the ICU. The ICU is for people that are sicker than people that are just in the regular hospital. The number of COVID patients in Wisconsin that are in the ICU today is 96. That's not a crisis. Now, I'd hate to be one of those 96, but that's not a crisis. And those numbers, again, are not a spike. On the other hand, and this is where I try to throw some cold water on the people who keep saying it's over, it's over, it's over. The numbers aren't going down. They've gone down somewhat from that big spike we had in the spring across the United States. But they've essentially flatlined. It jags up and down a bit because, as I say, I think a lot of people are in the hospital for only one day. This number of 250 is about where we were a month ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's where we are in September. Maybe even in the winter months it'll go up a little bit again because more people are indoors. I don't know. But to say that we have a spike or the coronavirus is raging in Wisconsin and that the need for this mask and all of this is because something new that is happening now is simply not true. And I will predict that the number of people wearing masks and the mask requirement isn't going to move these numbers at all because I don't think the masks have anything to do with the transmission of the virus. Maybe they have a minimal impact on two people that are standing next to each other for 5, 10, or 15 or 20 minutes. But until we tell people that they can't ever do that without a mask on, until you tell people that we can't have anybody who isn't married to one another make out and kiss or hug or do any of the other things in which you're breathing and slobbering all over yourself, what good is putting a mask on to stop you from being on top of some guy you were never going to be on top of? You got a guy who comes into your house to sell you something. It's not like you're up there licking his nose in the first place. So he's got a mask on, you got a mask on, you're standing 10 feet away. Well, you'd always be standing 10 feet away. This is my point about why it's irrelevant. If you want to stop the transmission of this thing, you need to stop people from having close physical contact with people that are not in their immediate family. But that would mean starting to say all sorts of things that we don't want to say. Essentially, take the saltpeter and eliminate the sexual contact and all of the other things in which people are on top of one another and exchanging bodily fluids. For heaven's sakes, going back to when I was a kid, this is how old I am. You know what the big thing was you could get in college? This is before AIDS. That's how old I am. Well, VD was there. You're right about that. But no, it was more of a general sickness. Mono. And mono would knock you out for a year. Mono would not, and that was a big thing when you were a kid. You talk about mono. Well, how'd you get mono? Make it out. That we called it the kissing disease. And it wasn't a venereal disease in that it was necessarily sexually transmitted. It's just that, I don't get too goofy here, but when you're making out, the kissing and the tongues and all of that stuff, and you're changing a lot of bodily fluids because you're hugging and kissing and so on, and that's what mononucleosis was. And they were told that, look, if you want to stop this, if it was going on through a high school or going through a college campus, you guys need to cool it off for a while because there's mono out there on the campus. There's a mono outbreak, and it's spread when you have close contact with strangers. I think that kind of thing, I got to go to a break. I have tried to be honest with the audience and not allow a political agenda to affect my analysis of COVID without regard to which side it would help or not. No one on the left has wanted to do that at all. They have wanted to hype this for political purposes, and they have refused to observe anything that's happened. My biggest light bulb over the head moments were the following. The incredible outbreak in New York, concentrated around subway stations. There's no city in the United States that comes close to New York in reliance on mass transit than New York City. Virtually everyone uses it. There's very little private ownership of cars. There's very little garages. And New York has by far the heaviest use of the subway system. Subways are different than buses in that at a bus you get on almost every block. Subways, you get on every 14, 16 blocks. Masses crowd into these stations and go through the turnstiles. And then when you're on the trains, they're clogged. A lot of sharing of contact, people on top of one another. Far greater outbreak in New York still than anywhere else in the United States. The other light bulb over the head moment, New Orleans during Mardi Gras. If you take a look at the places that have had terrible outbreaks, almost all of them are Democratic areas and almost all of them are cities, which indicates close contact. The outlier was New Orleans. New Orleans had almost no problem. Then Mardi Gras occurred. What is Mardi Gras? You have people who come from all over the world. So you have it's total throwing of strangers from everywhere together. What happens during Mardi Gras? It's a giant orgy. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody who goes to Mardi Gras has sex with a stranger, but it's a big part of the experience. And again, how is this thing likely passed along to one another? I don't think Paul's going to give it to me, bringing his paper in here, bringing the papers in here that I have and so on. But in the meantime, he's in another room. I'm in another room. We're working essentially with casual distancing, social distancing. It's how most people operate. But if somebody has COVID, and I decide that I'm going to hug and kiss them or go farther with them, guess what? You're going to transmit it. And the fact that there was that monstrous outbreak in New Orleans right after Mardi Gras, again, told me something. But in the meantime, we're telling people who never get close to the other person anyway to put masks on, do all of this other stuff, don't put the kids in the school. None of this seems to have anything to do with how this thing is being spread. The cities will be vulnerable because of mass transit and because of density of people being close together. Las Vegas is always going to be an issue because essentially that's a giant Mardi Gras. Strangers coming from all over the place, a lot of sexual contact and so on going on. I don't know how they ever get their numbers to zero because of that. For most of the rest of us who are not elderly and who do not live in a dense housing complex like a nursing home, the normal precautions that you would take to avoid any type of a sickness, the flu going through or anything else, would be sufficient for this. But that's all based on observation that we have chose not to make. In the meantime, you have the entire media in this state lying to the public saying that there's a spike in coronavirus in Wisconsin. It's raging all over the place, which is simply not true. Not going down, but it's not going up. Track the hospitalization number, which is, as I say, the only number that matters. The death number matters somewhat. But I've given up a lot of faith in that, given how we see that they're counting as coronavirus deaths. I really wonder. We should go into the records and see if they actually did mark George Floyd down. Do we know they didn't? That might be the one in which they restrained themselves because somebody would have caught them on it. But George Floyd died with coronavirus. And based on the new video that's out, it seems to me that he may have had a bad case of coronavirus when he kept yapping that he can't breathe. Did you see that? Did you see the extended video? He was saying, I can't breathe when he was standing on his feet and breathing. He was saying, I can't breathe for 20 minutes. So, I mean, he was saying he couldn't breathe when he, in fact, actually was breathing. the guy was on drugs and he had a bad case of the COVID going on. It starts to explain a lot, which still does not, I think, justify what happened at the end of the video. Nonetheless, the point that I make here is that I don't fully trust the death numbers because of how they're adding in as a COVID death anybody who got COVID and died for any purpose. But as I say, the hospital number is a real number. Maybe it's hype too, because the hospitals get more reimbursement money for a COVID patient, but I'm guessing most of the people in the hospital listed as COVID, in fact, have COVID in their actual numbers, and it's the best way to gauge whether or not this thing is going away, increasing, going down, or whatever. And when they keep telling you that we've got to do all these things because the problem is getting worse in Wisconsin, they're being untruthful with you. It is not getting worse in Wisconsin. Never mind what you're hearing behind me there. It's irrelevant. I'm going to be giving you in a moment here the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text in word for the 5 o'clock hour. Do want to plug what's going to come up after the newscast, though. Another story, and it's more than one instance here in Wisconsin of businesses being persecuted because they're on the wrong side of the whole Black Lives Matter agenda of condemning and demonizing the police. On Monday's program, the last one I did, I mentioned that there is this difficulty right now of the silent majority being able to assert itself. That a very, very loud and aggressive and bullying minority is shoving everybody else around, and we don't really know how to respond. Until we are aware of how severe the problem is, and until people start to be concerned when it happens to someone else that isn't yet them, we're not going to make any progress on it. Let me give you the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text in word for this hour. It is RICH, R-I-C-H, RICH. Text RICH to 200-200 anytime between now and 6 o'clock. You'll get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio. Info standard date and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. Ending this long discussion that I've had, that I've used the umbrella of closing the schools as part of this larger discussion of society trying to return to work in some sense of normalcy during the coronavirus situation that isn't going away, but I also contend is not getting worse. This point. Other than a handful of exceptions, a rare graper here or there. Since the coronavirus thing started, up until now, we've had some people who've had to work pretty much like normal, others who've worked with maybe a few days off, and others who've been in a stay-at-home mode or laid off altogether. Their business went under. Various categories. But there's a lot of us who are in this category, like, say, me and Paul, where essentially nothing changed. We clean the building more, and there's fewer coworkers that are in here and so on. But unlike some in the media, I'm not doing my show from home, and Paul's not producing from home. It wasn't really practical to do it. Theoretically, we could have, but we're here. There's a lot of other people that have a lot of other jobs like us that are here, that are doing the jobs. Seriously, now, other than like rare exceptions here and there, can you think of anybody who's been back to work during this like we are, complaining about it? Have you heard the grocery store workers complaining they have to work at the grocery store? And again, I'm not saying there aren't a rare exception. There's always people who complain about anything. The drugstore workers, are they complaining? People that are doing road construction, which, boy, that hasn't slowed down this summer, has it? Are they complaining that they have to go out and do the road construction? I think all of the what do you call it? The nurseries, the greenhouses, I think they're all operating. Are the landscapers complaining that they shouldn't have to work during the coronavirus? For all the crapping we do all over police officers? Have you heard any cops complaining that they shouldn't have to work? Protesters in their face, every other humanity in their face? Working and sharing squads in some cases with other officers. Have you heard any cops complaining that they shouldn't have to work? How about the firefighters? They essentially live in the same thing. Have you heard any of them complaining that they shouldn't have to work? Active duty Army, Navy, Marines, they share barracks in some cases together, the ones that at least are in the basic training. Have you heard anything complain that they should be sent home and not be in the military? The department stores have reopened. Have you heard anybody complain that they have to work at Target? I'm serious about this point. Paramedics, you've heard any of them complain that they have to go to work? There's a lot of things that are actually operating right now, aren't there? We're still doing a lot of stuff. Other than some people would just prefer not to have to work. Who wouldn't? I haven't heard any complaining. First group of bellyachers has to again be the teachers. Nobody else is throwing a hissy fit except them. And you know what? A lot of those workplaces that I'm describing, you're a lot likelier to get COVID than in a school. Hey, and I'm not denying that there's going to be cases in the schools. There are. Some of these kids are going to bring it in. They'll be carriers, even though they usually aren't. One teacher's going to get it. 3, 4, 5 others are probably going to get it too. They'll test positive, just as any other place is going to happen. Right now, we're testing 4 or 5% test positive of those that are tested. Probably the same thing's going to be in the schools. And you might get a school that's a hot spot that gets up to 5, 10, 15 people in there, get a positive test. Maybe only one is sick. But my point is, as a society, we have had some people who have been in a work-at-home mode because that's what their employers decided. Other people, they didn't have any choice. Their companies went under. And then you've had people who have been back at work because it was the nature of their job. I have heard almost zero complaining from people who have been back at work. Across the board. It wasn't until this moment when we talked about opening the schools that you got this crybabying going on. Police officers put their lives on the line. So do firefighters. So frankly, do a lot of other people. A lot of people who have other kinds of jobs that you don't think about. How'd you like to be a DoorDash employee? The murder rate we got going on in the city, they're walking up to... They're smart not to carry any money other than whatever cash tip that they get. Well, how'd you like to go banging on everybody's door with all this food and so on? No one knows what's lurking behind that. With coronavirus, people breathing all over them and pit bulls behind the door. They're all doing it. Get off your sanctimonious high horse. Once again, nobody crying at all. Paul, we got the on-air people at all our stations. You've heard any of them complaining that they got to work? Happy. Well, radio, we're always, every day that goes by that you aren't laid off. And, a lot of people here have taken cuts or have forced furlough days that they have to take, which is a way of cutting their pay, which we haven't done to the teachers at all. All this, we care about the kids, we care about that, we care about the other thing and all. You don't care about anything. And the first group of people in the whole doggone country to say, we can't work, it's too dangerous, is again the public school teachers. And I want to make it clear, I'm talking here only about those that are complaining and only about the public school teachers. I haven't heard any private school teachers whose schools plan to reopen complain that they have to reopen. Well, Paul's also mentioned companies like ours took away the 401k match. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets. That's happening all over the place. Nothing's happened to any of these public employees. Nothing. Nothing. But of all the people who've had these things, etc. Again, the bitching comes from one quarter. The people who, oh my goodness gracious, I have to go and teach. I might get the virus. Oh, get out the Stradivarius and play the fiddle. If you wonder why you get this kind of heat, it's because you will not shut up with your crying. It is not asking too much that a teacher teach. It's just not. Unless we're going to permanently shut down every other part of society. We at least now know this. We now know that the public school teachers by themselves have defined themselves as non-essential employees. They have created that definition themselves because the people who have been working during this fit that category of non-essential. And the teachers have decided they are non-essential. We didn't do it for them. In fact, here I am. I'm the guy that says they actually ought to work. Who knows? Maybe we'll be better off if the moms and dads just do the lessons all themselves, and maybe we'll be able to knock out a little bit of leftyism by not having any of them in the school. In the meantime, let's start selling off some of those school buildings, and don't anybody again ever be dumb enough to vote for one of these referendums. It's 5:32 at News Talk. Oh, yeah, I did. Now, wait a minute. Well, my system. If it's in the garbage, I did the word. And now I'm looking at the word and I remember reading the word. You did the word. Yes, we did the word. Why? Is somebody complaining to you I didn't do the word? You didn't record. Well, you didn't steel trap of a mind that you have in there. If you were a mouse trap, the mice would like run into your trap just to taunt you. Ah, look at this, and then flip you off. At 5:33 now. This show's never going to. Standing up for Milwaukee. This is the Mark Belling late afternoon show. Slack 11:30 WISN. Yeah, quite a DNC we're going to have in Milwaukee. Now Biden's not even coming. The thing is, he has to give a speech. I mean, he has to give a speech. All he does is read it. He has to give it. He could have just as easily come to... Now, the explanation they're giving is, well, we're monitoring where the virus is, and that's where we're not going to send Joe where the virus is, as I established earlier. If you want to find a dead zone for coronavirus, it's the state of Wisconsin. So Joe Biden's not going to come here. We don't even know now if anybody's going to be here. The good news on that is the rioters might decide not to come once they figure out that there's actually going to be no Democratic convention in Milwaukee other than 3 local people that are sitting at a card table. I don't know. Anyway, there is an interesting analysis to this story. Biden has to give a speech. There's got to be a speech that they put out there because the TV networks will probably show it. He's got to offer up his message. The convention acceptance speech is traditionally used by presidential candidates as their case for re-election. You know, they're usually like an hour long. And they're a really big deal in which they cover their points. It's the case to the American public. And as you know, a lot of Americans watch them. If they watch anything at a convention, it's the acceptance speech. So he's got to give a speech. They're not going to give up the opportunity to have him speak. So why aren't they sending him to Milwaukee? Again, there's only one way to read this. Clearly, they could put Joe Biden on his own private plane sprayed with Lysol, and they could bring him into a room in Milwaukee with a few of the people here, guarded away from people. He's not going to get the virus. I think they are so concerned, Biden's handlers, about Joe's mental state, that they want to do this in the environment in which he is least likely to botch it. So they're going to keep him in Wilmington, put him in a studio setting there so that he doesn't have to fly, that his routine isn't upset, and hope he can work through it. Hope he can somehow read the thing off a teleprompter without fouling the whole thing up. I think they're afraid to send him to Milwaukee to give a speech to 20 people that he's reading. I'm even going to make a prediction. I predict they're going to record it. I predict he'll cut the thing earlier in the day, and if he screws up, they'll be able to stop the tape and redo the thing over again. I don't even think he'll do this from a studio live. They won't trust him for that. Now, he did get interviewed in a couple of softball interviews over the last couple of days. One was CBS with somebody named Barnett, Aaron Barnett, I believe. And once again, he started putting his foot in his mouth and he was answering questions and the words weren't going together. And he said, "You're trying to bait me. You're trying to goad me." And nobody actually knew how he was being baited or goaded. I am of the opinion, as you know, that he's not going to debate President Trump because his handlers fear that if he actually got into a debate with President Trump, who would show no mercy. The only downside for Trump is that he might look too cruel as Biden fumbles around all over the place and loses his place and doesn't know what he's talking about and so on. I don't think he's going to debate President Trump. The fact that the easiest thing for most candidates, if you're a politician, you're a pretty good talker. There have been very few of these speeches that people have ever given that didn't go over well. I mean, Sarah Palin's crowning moment was that spectacular vice presidential speech that she gave back when she was John McCain's running mate in 2008. People remember Obama with the pillars in Colorado. Trump's speech was brilliant 4 years ago. It's hard to screw the thing up because, after all, you're a politician. You're used to being in front of public. You know how to work the teleprompters. You've got the greatest speechwriters that work it for you. You generally, in a convention, it's a adoring crowd of supporters that are going to cheer and root you on. It's hard to screw the whole thing up. Joe Biden is the one candidate we've seen that his people literally are terrified of him giving a speech in the most controlled and positive setting imaginable. As for what it means in Milwaukee and the whole thing, I just think it's kind of funny that the lefties were so looking forward to this. They're the ones that told us to lock the entire world down over COVID. I didn't. And the reason that your convention here is going to be a great big giant dud is because that's the scenario that you created. Now, in a weird way, the person who's the big loser in these conventions sort of going virtual, and the Republican convention's basically just going to be a Trump speech with a limited size thing. It actually might harm Trump a little bit more. Joe Biden wasn't going to go in the best of circumstances and give a good speech. Donald Trump is at his best when he's got a large room. Donald Trump suffers from not being able to have these massive campaign rallies and so on that people get people so fired up. And the other thing that the rallies do that he's not getting the pump from right now ties into the next segment that I do. Remember the Trump rally we had here in Milwaukee right before the virus broke out? It was the one that was held at the arena where people stood in line for hours and then packed the 10,000 seat, what do they call it? Milwaukee Panther Arena. When you see that kind of crowd, it makes it very hard for the media and others to be successful in demonizing Trump supporters as a bunch of fringe kooks, and there's hardly any of them, when you see so many people, and they're so nice, and they're so intelligent, and they're so well behaved. It reinforces that Trump supporters are the real America. And it's certainly a good contrast to people that are screaming at police officers and trying to burn down courthouses. You lose that visual reinforcement of who Donald Trump supporters really are. So he, I think, suffers the most by all of this, which may have been part of the plan altogether. In the meantime, as I mentioned a couple of times over the last few days in the program, we're in this environment right now where the so-called silent majority, it's irrelevant that they're a majority. People are being slapped down like crazy for holding views that in many cases are mainstream views. People are being tormented in their homes. I mentioned the story in Greenfield, where because a guy had a pro-police sign in his yard, he had people chanting at him. His neighbor came out to yell at him. She got death threats. This sort of thing is happening all over the United States. We still don't know what the case is with Brunel Trammell, but it is certainly possible he was targeted because of his support for Trump. Maybe not. Don't know. A lot of people will say, well, there's still more of us than there are of them. There's still more patriotic Americans and so on. What if that doesn't matter? I really do wonder. When the Nazis started in Germany, was that a majority movement from the beginning? I bet it wasn't. We know by history that the Marxist movement in Russia wasn't a majority movement. Revolutions start with a minority that grab power and then enforce their will on the majority, who are forced to comply or go to the gulag. Two stories from here in Wisconsin about what is happening to people for just being regular old. Keep getting warmer with a beautiful end of the week. Should drop down to about 60 for a low tonight. Tomorrow, partly sunny with a high of 76. Friday, partly sunny, high 79. Saturday, just spectacular. Partly sunny, maybe a thunderstorm at a high of 84. Up to 88 on Sunday. 87 for Monday, but clouds on Monday with a chance for showers and thunderstorms. The first story comes from Green Bay. Deals with a sports bar fairly close to Lambeau Field. You've been to Lambeau Field. Notice that there's a fair number of sports bars around. You have a bar near Lambeau Field. It's kind of a no-brainer. Let's kind of put a little bit of a sports theme in the whole thing, right? Well, anyway, the owner of the bar has been in the business for 30 years. Story is shared with me with a friend by a friend of his. The name of the place is called Burkle's One Block Over. I like to make fun of bar names. Well, one block over from what? Is it one block from the stadium? One block from something? It's clever enough, right? Burkle's One Block Over. Well, the owner has about had it with all the politicking from the athletes. And he's staring at a Lambeau Field season in which maybe there's no fans or hardly any fans, etc. And according to his friend, he's a guy that posts quite a bit of stuff on social media. And he made it clear that he was frustrated with all the government rules putting in place in the COVID and that he's about had it with all the crybaby athletes. In his bar, he's got a collection of sports memorabilia. Some of this stuff obviously is worth a lot, and if you're near Lambeau Field, you've probably gotten a fair number of pretty good Packer stuff. He decided, he says, maybe it's just because he lost money during the lockdowns and so on, but he says, because I'm fed up with the NFL and fed up with the players, I'm going to sell all my sports memorabilia. Now, I would think if you own sports memorabilia, at some point you want to sell it. What's the point of having it and then dying? You know what I'm saying? So when people sell their coin collections, they turn it into cash, and then you know who ends up with the cash? Their heirs. The heirs are always in favor of selling those collections. So anyway, he says, I'm fed up with the whole thing. I'm fed up with the athletes and the crying and the whining and the kneeling during the anthem and the COVID thing and so on. So I'm going to sell my sports memorabilia, and the estimate that he could get for it is somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000. Local TV station, Green Bay TV station, Fox 11 does a story on this. The guy's had the sports bar near Lambeau Field forever. He's selling his collection because he's just tired of the crybaby athletes and so on. Some of you can imagine where this story went. Can you imagine where the story went? Paul can't imagine where the story went. Well, the tone of the TV station story was not nice sports bar owner sells his memorabilia because he wants to get into it. It's no, sports bar owner attacks athletes for expressing their points of view. The guy has been targeted ever since by Black Lives Matter. This is the environment that exists right now in our country, and people keep getting surprised when the stories occur. Let me share from a friend of mine, a friend of his who contacted me about this. When the story aired, this is what got interesting. Fox 11 turned the story from a memorabilia sale and a change of theme to a Black Lives Matter smear on him and his bar. Since the story ran, he and his employees have been harassed and threatened. He was talking to his attorney about filing a lawsuit against the station. I don't know where things stand today. I wanted to add a link to the story, but it's not on their website anymore. Perhaps it was taken down. He mentions the name of the owner, said, I know that this story is in Green Bay, but it just shows how the media can twist things and really do damage to a business and his employees. So the guy went on and he probably made some comments. I'm tired of all the athletes criticizing the police, so forth and so on. Simply for expressing your point of view, that makes you a target. And as I said, the guy's active on social media. They probably found a few posts criticizing the kneeling and so on. He is now a target, and they're going after his employees. I want to share with you another story. This one is from West Allis. It comes from the owners of a place called the West Allian Brewing Company. I think it's on 72nd Street. The owners are Kim and Eric. They're married. We're proud to say we are a family-owned and veteran-owned business. Eric served in the United States Marine Corps and is also an Iraqi war veteran. We opened the very first brewery in West Allis in April of 2017 and have used our tap room and platform for many charitable and community causes. These causes included but are not limited to homeless veterans initiatives, paralyzed vets, animal shelters, Children's Hospital and Herma Heart Center, Hurricane Maria supporting the Puerto Rican community, and so on. We even have had a number of political fundraisers for a few local Democrats. Eric and I have always believed in staying neutral and welcoming all types of causes to utilize our tap room and event space. We are, after all, business. We are, after all, a business. So, when we received a message about 2 weeks ago from a friend who also served in the Marine Corps, wanting to hold a fundraiser at the brewery for families of fallen police officers, we gladly accepted. Now, again, some of you can't imagine where the story is going to go. As you can imagine, with the pandemic and shutdowns, we have been struggling for a small business, so we were really excited to have the extra business on a Monday evening when we are normally closed. Also, we had received a message that Second Lady Pence picked our business to visit when in town this week, Tuesday, so she could talk with a military spouse and meet a military family and visit a military-owned business. Unfortunately, their flight was canceled yesterday morning due to the weather, but this was supposed to be an extremely positive week for us. A couple evenings prior to the event, we started hearing chatter via Facebook that there was a protest planned outside our brewery the evening of the event. Eric and I were not too concerned about this. Again, people just can't believe what they're going to be on the receiving end of this. There's been this level of disbelief, like the guy in Greenfield. He couldn't believe in Greenfield for putting up a sign supporting the police officers that he could become a target. The guy up in Green Bay for changing the theme of his bar could not believe that he'd become a target. And now this business that was going to host a fundraiser put on by somebody else to support victims of families of fallen police officers cannot believe that they would become a target. So, well, we weren't too concerned. We quickly realized that the reason for the protest was because this event did stand for backing the badge, which automatically lumped us into a category of being racist, bootlicking business owners. We showed up to the brewery Monday evening to set up for the event, and we saw that our sidewalk around the brewery chalked and spray painted. The event started at 6 p.m. By 6:30, we had 50 to 75 Black Lives Matter protesters in front of our brewery chanting, F, then the F word, the police, throwing up gang signs and getting in people's faces. For the most part, as intense as it remained peaceful without incident. I do want to point out that West Alien does follow the state guidelines for masks. We have signs on our doors. Guests must enter with a mask, and our staff also is required to wear masks. The amount of backlash we have received as a result of this fundraiser is quite overwhelming, and we do not deserve this. I have people who have never stepped into our brewery calling us racist, accusing us of spitting in their beer, saying our beer tastes like chemicals, boots, leather, COVID. I know, I didn't know COVID had a flavor, and so on. And by the way, she sent me the pages and pages and pages of social media posts making these claims about the business. They're out now on social media to destroy their business. They, as in the protesters, have also called the health department on us, trying to get us fined and or shut down. If only these protesters knew how much we have given back to the community. They don't care. Hell, we could have been Dorfner Brewing Company, their last name, but instead honored our community and city with our brewery name. We also see on Facebook that these Black Lives Matter protesters are going to come into our tap room undercover and disguise so they can take pictures and potentially hurt our little family-owned business. I'm sending the screenshots for your reference if necessary. This experience has been very eye-opening and stressful. We do not believe canceling the event would have helped, and we do believe in equality and not silencing a voice to hear another. In fact, we welcome all groups. We always have. And it's signed by Kimberly of the family that owns the West Alien Brewing Company. So again, you have a situation here where I think it is a very small minority of our public that believes you should target and harass and try to destroy this business because they hosted a fundraiser for families of fallen police officers. But the fact of the matter is that the rest of us don't know what it is that we're supposed to do about this. When you have people that are willing to engage in this kind of behavior, bullying, intimidation, use social media, protesting, making potential patrons feel uncomfortable, when they have decided to simply set out and try to destroy you, simply because you did a positive event for, by the way, they just hosted the fundraiser, a positive event for families of police officers. And when you do this in West Allis, Wisconsin, likely a pro-police community, and you're facing this kind of thing, people do not know how to respond. The radicals have figured out from Portland to Seattle to Green Bay to West Allis that they can play by rules that nobody else is allowed to play by, and they can win by doing it. Until the rest of us realize that some people involved in these protests are well-intentioned, but many of the leaders are not. They were radicals looking for a reason to light a fire in this country. They chose the George Floyd reason as the incident, but it would have been something else. And they have taken it all over America, and their main goal, from protests in suburbs to chanting in front of people's houses to trying to gut businesses, their main goal is to silence the rest of us so that even though we may be a majority, we are not allowed to speak and we are terrified to speak, even if that speech isn't political, for merely saying, we ought to help out the victims of a dead police officer. You are now a target. That's the reality of what exists right now in this country. Furthermore, you will see almost no politicians. I doubt the mayor of West Allis. I doubt the county executive. I doubt the governor will be willing to go to bat and stand up for this business and say it ought to be supported. If Tony Evers had any you-know-whats, which he doesn't, he'd hold a news conference in front of this business saying that this is a great business that supports all in the community and what these protesters have done is despicable. I don't even know that you can get the mayor to do that because none of those politicians want to cross these people either. We are not in normal free speech and normal American open debating. What we are in is an environment of intimidation, bullying, and goon-like behavior in which no rules are being followed. And the rest of us are at a loss as to how to counter it. 611. We come back after the break. I'll give you the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text in word for the 6 o'clock hour. 611 News Talk 1130 WISN. News Talk 1130 WISN. Mark Belling, late afternoon show. First things first, let's try to give away $1,000. The word in the Sizzling Summer Cash Contest text in contest for this hour is win. W-I-N, win. You see any of that Bucks game yesterday? Oh, you wouldn't. I was busier than you. I used to make fun of Paul for taking days off and doing housework. Now here my pathetic life is. I at least have an excuse. We have nothing to do anymore. What are you supposed to do on a Tuesday? Well, anyway, you get the impression that the Bucks kind of realize that this little bit of a regular season doesn't. They actually still need to win a game. They only need to win one game and they clinch the top seed in the Eastern Conference. So they have to win one game. But anyway, Giannis and Chris Middleton didn't play the second half, and they somehow lost to Brooklyn, who they don't even have any of their guys on their team. But I don't know how exciting the playoffs are going to be with no fans and so on. But this end of the regular season, for some teams, they're deciding if they actually make the playoffs. So the Bucks are just trying to get to the next point. So winning was not a high priority yesterday. They almost won, but they lost. I think they're 20-point favorites, and they lost. Anyway, the word is win. Text that into 200-200 anytime between now and 7 o'clock. You can win $1,000. You get a text confirming entry plus iHeartRadio info, standard data, and message rates apply in this nationwide contest. 2 items here first. I will grant you that not all public school teachers are liberal. I have merely said that most are. Those that are conservative generally keep their mouths shut because they know the kind of environment that exists for somebody who is not a liberal, who's in a public school environment. They can be subjected to bullying, intimidation from their fellow teachers. There are a handful, however, who speak out. Let me tell you the story of Jeannie Hedgepeth. She is a social studies teacher at Palatine High School. Palatine is a suburb of Chicago, northwest of where O'Hara is, even farther out. Palatine. On Facebook, she made a post questioning the whole concept of white privilege. She said, "I am about facts, truth-seeking, and love. I will speak on any topic I choose because I live in a free country. I find the term white privilege as racist as the N-word. You have not walked in my shoes either, so do not make assumptions about me and my so-called privilege. You think America is racist? Then you have been hoodwinked by the white liberal establishment and race baiters like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. Travel the world and go see that every nation has racism, and some more than others, but few make efforts as such as we do to mitigate or eliminate it." She went on to recommend the works of Thomas Sowell, the brilliant conservative economist, the political commentator Larry Elder, and Candace Owens. So there are some conservative school teachers there. You would think that was the end of the story, right? Jeannie Hedgepeth has been fired by the Palatine School Board for that post. Fired. You don't have to say the N-word anymore. You don't have to engage in overt racism. If you merely express a political point of view that I suspect a huge segment of Americans agree with, that white privilege in the United States is overstated, and that our nation is nowhere near the most racist in the world, that we have worked to mitigate the problem of racism, and that there are many eloquent African Americans who speak on this subject, that many people agree with that. It got her fired. Again, the majority who may support that point of view and those who believe in free expression do not know what to do about this. It's continuing and continuing and continuing. The reason for the silence from the rest of us is A, many people don't want to become targets themselves. I mentioned why you're not going to see any politicians stand up at that bar in West Dallas. They don't want to have the harassment themselves. They don't want to be lumped in as the next bigot. So they take a pass and they hide out. As for the rest of us, we never tend to worry about the oppression of someone else until we become the one that's oppressed. If the radicals are hellbent on taking over this country and bullying and silencing the vast majority, they're doing it very well. And they're following what has happened in every other country that radicals have taken over and then hijacked that country and turned it into the sort of immoral sewer that you see in much of the rest of the world. Now, when I do stories like this, I don't want to leave you totally without hope or suggest that there's no way out or you can't get through the end of this. I'm merely saying that we need to be aware of the fact that really for the first time, this is, I would say, first time since the McCarthyist movement, when you had people who were communist leaning that were afraid to express their point of views. You now, though, have people who don't have a fringe viewpoint like communism. You have people that are terrified of expressing mainstream normal views that are being persecuted for them. Let's move now to this story. The state legislature has not acted to block Governor Evers' mask mandate, and I keep getting people asking me, well, what are they waiting for? This story is very simple to understand. The state Senate wants to have a special session to block the order, but the Assembly is balking. Why? Well, they don't have the votes. People are saying that this is Robin Boss's fault. Well, he's the speaker. But Robin Boss has a caucus of Republicans, and he does not have enough of them that are willing to vote to block the mask mandate. I will tell you what the calculus is that they're going through. There are quite a few Republicans who are saying, look, the order expires September 28th by law. Just let it run its course. Furthermore, they're saying that every public opinion poll that's out there overwhelmingly supports mask requirements. You've seen those polls. They're overwhelming. I've said that I think people are giving answers to those polls that they don't actually share, that a lot of people are saying, I believe in mandating masks, but they're not even wearing a mask themselves, even though they want to mandate everybody else. And there are many others who are aware that this thing is not being enforced in much of Wisconsin. So what do you care if there's a mandate in place if it's not there in our community? Given the fact that the public opinion numbers seem to overwhelmingly support a mask mandate, there are some Republicans wondering why in an election year are we going to get on the wrong side of opinion? And they're debating this. And that's the problem that exists in the state Senate. There is a problem, however, with their thinking. Republicans can also be guilty of one-dimensional thinking. When did I say the order expired? September 28th. Well, duh. What do you think is going to happen on September 29th? Tony Evers is going to put out a new order. And if they block it then, now you're blocking it right before the election comes up. You block it now. You're not doing it virtually on election day. If you wait until September 29th for the second order to try to negate it, now suddenly you're trying to kill people. That becomes the ad that's run everywhere, and every swing district Republican doesn't care if people die. If you want to say, yeah, I want to send your kids to, first of all, you want to send your kids to school, and now you want all sorts of people to breathe their COVID all over them. They set themselves up for this. And if they don't block it September 29th, you're essentially saying we're going to sit back and not let Tony Evers issue these mandates forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Given the fact that every community that wants to is already issuing its own mask mandate. Wauwatosa now has one, Charlotte has one, Milwaukee, and there's zillion communities that have a mask mandate anyway. The answer to this is to simply let the local communities that want to mandate them do it. I'm not hearing a lot of complaints in the places that have done it, to be honest with you. Yeah, Shorewood wants to do it outside. But again, if Shorewood wants to do it outside, stupid as it is, Shorewood can be stupid, and it doesn't affect Rhinelander. If there are communities that don't want to have it, and the legislature should stand up and negate this order, and if they think that if they take Tony Evers' bait here and let this thing just run out on September 28th, that he's not going to turn around and do another one to him, he's going to. So I think their calculation is wrong, but if you're wondering why they haven't moved to block the order, it's because they don't have the votes to do so. And if you want to have them to have the votes to do so, you need to contact your Republican assemblymen, not senators. They're not the problem. Assemblymen, and encourage them to do this. No one, here's one other point on this. There's another reason they don't want to vote on this. They don't want to have to vote one way or the other. If they don't vote, nobody goes on record either way, and you can't criticize their vote. This is one of those votes that will not make everyone happy. Whichever way you go, you're going to infuriate people on one side or the other. So in an election year, again, there's a desire on the part of, remember, the assembly members, every one of them is up this year. The Senate, only half. There are a lot of them just don't want to have to take this tough vote. Given the fact that they haven't had to do anything all summer anyway, I don't think it's asking too much to suggest that they take a stand on a tough issue, but those are the calculations that are out there, and it's hard to identify which assembly members are taking this stand because since there isn't a vote, we can only go by me trying to get inside information. Well, this one has cold feet, that one has cold feet, etc. I've heard some rumblings that, interestingly enough, it's some northern Wisconsin assemblymen that don't want to block this because they're saying, what do we care about the mask mandate? Our people aren't enforcing it. So we can act like we're in favor of it because it's not an issue for our people, but most of our communities aren't enforcing it at all. You can say the same thing in Waukesha County, where there's very little enforcement going on, despite the fact that the mandate is in place. 627 News Talk 1130 WISN. News Talk 1130 WISN, Mark Belling, late afternoon show. As I mentioned, we have an election coming up on Tuesday. You can vote yet this week in-person absentee voting. Again, if you were planning to do it by mail and you have not sent it in yet, again, if you just won't show up, I'd still mail it. I would not trust. Mail's just slow right now. It's screwed up. Trust mailing something even on Thursday to get it to an Ozaukee County election official by Tuesday. Show up and vote. There's no lines, especially if you do it in person tomorrow or Friday, depending again on the hours in your community. I've talked about the races in which the primary election essentially is the general election. They're overwhelmingly Republican districts, and who wins the primary wins the election. And people keep saying, put your recommendations on Belling.com. Unlike in April, the races that I felt strongly about commenting on, we have commented on the air at some length on. There is this race in Ozaukee County for the state assembly where the incumbent Republican, Rob Brooks, is challenged by a guy named Chris Reamer, who's the head of the Cedarburg School Board, big tax increase guy, passed big school tax increases, referendum at Cedarburg, and so on. It is believed that this is one of several cases around Wisconsin where liberals have put up candidates in overwhelmingly Republican districts where they know a Democrat couldn't win. So they just get a kind of liberal Republican and run him as a Republican and get the seat that way. Reamer, for example, is being backed by the road builders who don't like Rob Brooks' stance on that. Biggest tip-off there, the horrible former Transportation Secretary of Wisconsin, Mark Gottlieb, is endorsing Reamer. In fact, this is how dishonest Reamer's campaign is. He runs a thing saying, former Scott Walker Transportation Secretary Mark Gottlieb endorses me. So he implies that he has Walker's support. What he doesn't mention is Scott Walker fired Mark Gottlieb because Mark Gottlieb was a tool of the road builders and the tax hikers. But that's not the reason I bring this segment up. The reason I bring this segment up is we can have our criticisms of Republican members of the assembly who, for example, don't want to go and vote one way or another on this mask mandate. What would you say about somebody who won't comment on it one way or another in an election campaign 5 days before the election? So, Chris Reamer, do you support Tony Evers' mask mandate or not? Rob Brooks has said he wants to call in a special session to block the mask mandate order. Reamer doesn't want to take a stand on anything. That's it. What? Well, he's not a rhino. He's a political coward who does not want to come out and explain clearly who he is. I get mixed messages. Some people tell me that Brooks is going to win big. Other people say that Ozaukee County is more liberal than you think, and that Reamer might win. I don't really know. Paul says he's worried he's up there. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. Well, he's not going to be a BLM protester. They're not dumb enough to run one of those up there. No, you'll get somebody who's going to be a very, very weak-kneed Republican, which is a problem with a lot of them already in that caucus, and they're targeting guys that are more reliable conservatives like Brooks. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.